In this video, I'll be explaining the entire timeline of Alan Wake and Control in chronological order, covering how these two seemingly separate franchises connect into one shared universe. We'll be going through all the major games and expansions, including Alan Wake, Alan Wake's American Nightmare, Control, The Foundation, Control, AW, and Alan Wake 2, plus the key historical events that set everything in motion. This timeline focuses on the primary narrative events and does not delve into every minor side story or collectible lore entry, because if we tried to cover every single manuscript page, case file, and hotline recording, we'd be here for days. And honestly, a lot of that material reinforces what we already know rather than adding new chronological beats to the story. As always, throughout the video, there will be a timeline animation at the bottom of the screen, so you can easily follow along and understand exactly when each event takes place, which is especially important here because both franchises love to jump between different time periods, alternate dimensions, and flashbacks that can make it tricky to piece together what actually happened and when. Now here's something that might surprise you. The origins of the Old Gods of Asgard, a band central to Alan Wake's story, stretch back to the 1970s, long before Alan Wake himself was even born, and their music and history end up playing a crucial role in events that unfold decades later. But before we get to any of that, we need to explain the setting first, because understanding the nature of the Dark Place, the oldest house, and the Federal Bureau of Control is absolutely essential to making sense of how everything fits together. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, long before the events that would entangle Alan Wake in the mysteries of Bright Falls, two brothers were laying the groundwork for a legacy that would stretch across decades and realities. A small logging town of Bright Falls, Washington, a community nestled in the Pacific Northwest where the towering evergreens seemed to whisper secrets and the morning mist clung to the ground like something alive. The town itself had always been a place where the boundary between the ordinary and the extraordinary felt thinner than elsewhere, where local folklore spoke of spirits in the woods and something ancient sleeping beneath the waters of Cauldron Lake. The Anderson brothers were exposed to these stories from childhood. Their parents, like many longtime residents of Bright Falls, treated the local legends with a mixture of reverence and casual acceptance, the way people in other towns might discuss the weather or the salmon run. Tales of the Lady of the Light, a protective presence said to watch over the area, mingled with darker stories about things that lurked in the deepest parts of the forest, where the sunlight never quite reached the forest floor. Cauldron Lake in particular held a special place in the town's mythology. The lake was a volcanic caldera filled with dark water that reflected the sky like polished obsidian, and the locals spoke of it with a certain wariness and unspoken understanding that some places demanded respect. Growing up in this environment, surrounded by the raw beauty of the Pacific Northwest and steeped in its folklore, the Anderson brothers developed a fascination with mythology that extended beyond their immediate surroundings. They became particularly drawn to Norse legends, finding parallels between the old gods of Scandinavia and the mysterious forces that seemed to permeate their hometown. This interest would eventually become the foundation of their artistic identity. In the late 1960s, as rock and roll was evolving and the counterculture movement was reshaping American youth, Odin and Thor decided to form a band. They named themselves the Old Gods of Asgard, a declaration that announced their intentions to blend the mythic with the modern, the ancient with the electric. The band's early lineup included several other local musicians who shared the brothers' vision of creating something that transcended typical rock music. They began playing at local venues throughout Bright Falls, with the Oh Deer Diner becoming one of their regular haunts. The Diner, a classic roadside establishment with its distinctive neon sign featuring a startled deer, served as an informal community center for the town. Its back room could be converted into a makeshift performance space, and the owners were supportive of local talent. On weekend nights, the Anderson brothers and their bandmates would set up their equipment, the smell of coffee and pie mixing with cigarette smoke and the electric buzz of amplifiers warming up. Their early music drew from the hard rock sound that was dominating the era, but the Anderson brothers infused it with something distinctly their own. They incorporated folk influences, unusual time signatures, and lyrical themes that pulled directly from Norse mythology and the legends they had grown up hearing. Songs about Odin's sacrifice on Yggdrasil, Thor's battles with giants, and the twilight of the gods at Ragnarok shared setlists with original compositions inspired by Cauldron Lake and the forests surrounding Bright Falls. The music was raw and powerful, driven by Thor's thunderous drumming and Odin's guitar work, which could shift from delicate acoustic passages to walls of distortion within the same song. As they played more shows and refined their sound, the Old Gods of Asgard began to gain local fame. People came from neighboring towns to see them perform, drawn by word of mouth and the band's growing reputation for putting on intense, almost ritualistic shows. But something else was happening during these early performances, something that the band members themselves were only beginning to notice. Strange phenomena began occurring around them, particularly during and after their shows. Lights would flicker in patterns that seemed to follow the rhythm of their music. Audience members reported hearing whispers beneath the music, words in languages they couldn't identify. Shadows in the corners of the room appeared to move independently of any light source, stretching and contracting in ways that defied natural explanation. At first, the band attributed these occurrences to the atmosphere they were creating, to the power of performance and the heightened emotional state of live music. They were, after all, experimenting with altered states of consciousness themselves, as many musicians of that era were. The line between what was real and what was imagined seemed deliberately blurred, and in the heady days of the early 70s, that ambiguity felt like part of the artistic experience. But the phenomena persisted and intensified. Tor began keeping a journal of the strange events, noting correlations between specific songs and specific effects. When they played a particular composition inspired by the depths of Cauldron Lake, the temperature in the room would drop noticeably. Another song, one about awakening ancient powers, seemed to cause small objects to shift position, though no one could say they had actually seen them move. What the Anderson brothers didn't fully understand, what they couldn't have understood at that point in their lives, was that they were experiencing their first encounters with the Dark Presence. This entity, an ancient force of malevolence and hunger that resided within Cauldron Lake, had existed in that place for longer than human memory. The Dark Presence fed on creative energy, on the act of artistic creation itself, and it was drawn to those with powerful imaginations and the ability to shape reality through their art. In the Anderson brothers, it had found exactly what it craved. The Dark Presence began to subtly influence their creative process, not controlling them outright, but rather amplifying their natural abilities, encouraging them to delve deeper into mythological themes and to pour more of themselves into their music. The entity worked slowly and carefully, like a predator that understands patience. It would whisper inspiration into their dreams, plant ideas that felt like they had come from the brothers' own minds. It fed on the energy they generated when they created and performed, growing stronger with each song they wrote, each show they played. The Dark Presence was, in essence, cultivating them, nurturing their talents while simultaneously drawing sustenance from those same talents. This parasitic relationship was invisible to Odin and Tor, who only knew that their music seemed to be getting more powerful, more affecting, more real in ways they couldn't quite articulate. The supernatural occurrences around Bright Falls became more frequent and more pronounced. The band members witnessed flickering lights that couldn't be explained by faulty wiring, especially around Cauldron Lake and in the older parts of town. There were unsettling whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, voices speaking in the spaces between sounds. Shadows behaved strangely, shifting and stretching in ways that suggested intelligence and intent. The forests around Bright Falls, already dark and imposing, took on an even more oppressive quality. Band members walking home late at night after rehearsals reported feeling watched, pursued, though they never saw anyone or anything following them. These experiences began to seep into their music in more explicit ways. The lyrics became darker, more urgent, speaking of forces beyond human comprehension and the thin veil between worlds. Odin, who wrote most of the band's lyrics, found himself composing lines that he couldn't remember writing, discovering notebooks filled with his own handwriting describing things he had no conscious memory of conceiving. The music itself seemed to take on a life of its own during composition sessions. A riff that Tor played on guitar might echo through the rehearsal space long after he had stopped playing, or harmonics would emerge from the instruments that no one was producing deliberately. The band's music was beginning to influence reality in ways that went beyond the psychological or emotional impact that all-powerful art can have. This was something more literal, more tangible. Their songs were manifesting minor changes in their immediate surroundings, bending the fabric of reality in small but undeniable ways. A particular riff might cause a light bulb to shatter, not from volume but from something else, some resonance with forces that existed outside normal physical laws. A lyric about opening doors might cause an actual door to swing open, even when it had been securely closed. Objects would move during performances, small items like bottles or ashtrays sliding across surfaces as if pushed by invisible hands. The band members reacted to these phenomena with a mixture of confusion, awe, and a growing unease. They discussed what was happening during long nights after shows, trying to make sense of experiences that defied rational explanation. Some of the other band members, those who weren't part of the Anderson family, began to feel increasingly uncomfortable with the direction things were taking. They sensed, perhaps more clearly than Odin and Tor, that they were dealing with something dangerous, something that went beyond the usual risks of rock and roll excess. But for the Anderson brothers, the supernatural elements felt almost natural, an extension of the folklore they had grown up with and the mythology they had always been drawn to. They didn't fully grasp the true nature of what was happening, couldn't yet understand that their music was becoming a conduit for powers that existed in the darkness beneath Cauldron Lake. Their growing awareness took a disturbing turn when the band members began to notice that certain songs seemed to predict or even cause minor events around them. A track they had written about a storm rolling in off the lake would be followed within days by unseasonably violent weather. Lyrics about a raven's cry echoing through empty streets would precede sightings of unusual numbers of the blackbirds congregating in Bright Falls. At first, the Anderson brothers dismissed these occurrences as coincidence, the kind of pattern recognition that human minds are wired to find even in random chaos. But as the incidents accumulated, a growing sense of unease settled over the band, mingled with a strange wonder at what they might be tapping into. Tor, ever the pragmatist, kept a journal documenting these correlations, filling page after page with dates, lyrics, and corresponding events. The evidence became harder to ignore with each passing week. They channeled this unsettling discovery into their work, recording their first albums with a newfound intensity. These early recordings contained hidden meanings and prophecies that the band only partially understood themselves. The lyrics operated on multiple levels, accessible as straightforward rock poetry on the surface, while concealing deeper truths about the nature of reality in Bright Falls. The Anderson brothers found themselves writing in a kind of trance state, words flowing from some source beyond their conscious control. They would emerge from writing sessions with completed songs that felt both intimately theirs and utterly alien, as if they had merely transcribed something that already existed in the fabric of the world. Their debut album, The Raven Song, was released to modest regional success. The record featured tracks with cryptic lyrics that unknowingly alluded to the dark presence and the nature of Cauldron Lake. The title track spoke of a blackbird that sang in a voice like drowning, its melody pulling listeners down into dark water. Another song, The Lady in the Light, described a beautiful woman made of moonbeams who promised everything while offering nothing but shadow. Depths Below painted vivid imagery of something ancient sleeping beneath still waters, dreaming terrible dreams that leaked into the waking world. Critics praised the poetic ambiguity of the lyrics, interpreting them as metaphors for lost love, existential dread, or the darkness lurking in the American psyche. None suspected that the Anderson brothers were describing literal phenomena they had witnessed or sensed around Cauldron Lake. The recording sessions for these early albums were often fraught with strange occurrences that tested the band's resolve and the patience of their producers. Equipment would malfunction at crucial moments, tape machines suddenly running backward or speeding up without anyone touching the controls. Microphones would pick up sounds that no one in the studio had made, whispers and murmurs that seemed to come from nowhere. On one particularly unsettling night, the entire band heard what sounded like a woman's voice singing along with one of their tracks, a haunting harmony that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. When they played back the tape, the voice was there, faint but unmistakable, though no woman had been present during the session. The studio engineer, a skeptical professional who had worked with dozens of bands, quit the next day without explanation. They had to finish the album with a replacement who proved more willing to overlook the inexplicable. As their career progressed, the Anderson brothers began to incorporate more overt references to Norse mythology into their music and stage persona. They viewed the dark presence as a malevolent entity, akin to a mythical beast or god, something from the old stories that their Scandinavian ancestors would have recognized. Odin, in particular, became fascinated with the concept of the Norns, the weavers of fate in Norse legend, and wondered if the dark presence might be some corrupted version of such a force. The band started using imagery of Yggdrasil, the World Tree, in their album art, with dark roots reaching down into water that looked suspiciously like Cauldron Lake. They sang of Ragnarok and Fimbulwinter, of wolves chasing the sun and serpents gnawing at the roots of existence. These mythological frameworks gave them a language to discuss what they were experiencing, a way to conceptualize forces that defied modern rational explanation. Their second album, Balance, delved deeper into themes of light and shadow, unknowingly chronicling their struggle against the growing influence of the dark presence. The record opened with Two Sides, a song about opposing forces locked in eternal conflict, neither able to fully overcome the other. The Scales described a cosmic equilibrium constantly threatening to tip toward darkness. Keeper of the Flame told the story of a guardian who must tend an eternal fire to hold back the night, a role the Anderson brothers were beginning to realize they might be filling themselves. The closing track, When Darkness Comes, was a 7-minute epic that built from a whisper to a thunderous crescendo, its lyrics warning of a time when the shadows would rise and only those who remembered the old ways would stand against them. The album sold better than their debut, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, where listeners seemed to respond to something primal in the music. The band members, particularly Odin, started to develop a rudimentary understanding of the power of their art, though they still lacked a complete picture of how it all worked. Odin spent hours in the Bright Falls library researching folklore, occult traditions, and anything he could find about the history of the area. He discovered references to Native American legends about the lake, stories of a place where the spirit world pressed close to the physical. He found accounts from early settlers who had reported strange lights and voices near the water. He began to theorize that art itself, particularly music and storytelling, could act as a kind of bridge or conduit between different layers of reality. The more emotionally resonant the art, the more power it seemed to carry. Songs that came from genuine feeling, from real fear or hope or anger, appeared to have more effect than those crafted purely as commercial products. They experimented with their music, attempting to consciously evoke specific outcomes, though their efforts met with limited and unpredictable success. During one concert, they tried to write and perform a song specifically intended to drive away the oppressive atmosphere that had been hanging over Bright Falls for weeks. The performance was powerful, the crowd responding with unusual enthusiasm, but the results were mixed at best. The darkness seemed to recede for a few days, but then returned with renewed intensity, as if their interference had provoked some kind of response. Another time, they composed a piece meant to bring clarity and understanding, hoping it would help them see the true nature of what they were dealing with. Instead, the song triggered vivid nightmares for everyone who heard it, including the band members themselves. They realized they were playing with forces they could influence but not control, like children who had discovered matches without understanding fire. The local populace of Bright Falls began to associate the band's music with the strange happenings in the town, though most dismissed it as coincidence or superstition. Older residents would comment that things always seemed to get weird when the Anderson brothers were recording or performing. Some people claimed they could feel something in the air during the band's concerts, an electricity or tension that went beyond normal performance energy. A few locals started avoiding the band's shows, uncomfortable with the intensity of the experience. Others became devoted fans precisely because of that intensity, seeking out the cathartic release the music provided. The town's relationship with the old gods of Asgard was complicated, a mixture of pride in their local celebrities and unease about what they represented. Bar conversations would sometimes turn to speculation about whether the band was causing the strange events or simply reflecting something that was already happening, a debate that would never reach a satisfying conclusion. Their early career was marked by this blend of artistic success and growing apprehension as they grappled with the unknown forces at play. They were gaining recognition beyond Bright Falls, touring regionally and building a dedicated following. Music critics praised their unique sound and enigmatic lyrics. They were living the dream that countless garage bands aspired to, making a living from their art and connecting with audiences. Yet, beneath the surface, success lay a current of fear and responsibility. The Anderson brothers knew, even if they could not fully articulate it, that they had stumbled into something far larger than a music career. They were becoming players in a cosmic drama that had been unfolding long before they were born and would continue long after they were gone. The old gods of Asgard's music became a conduit for the dark presence, allowing its influence to spread through the emotional resonance of the songs and simultaneously a potential weapon against it, capable of channeling human creativity and will into a force that could resist the darkness. This dual nature would define their entire existence, setting the stage for future conflicts that would span decades. They were both infected by what they fought and empowered by their resistance to it. Their songs carried traces of the dark presence's corrupting influence, even as they worked to contain and oppose that same force. This paradox would haunt them throughout their lives, raising questions about whether they were truly fighting the darkness or merely dancing to its tune, instruments in a larger composition they could neither see nor understand. While the old gods of Asgard were crafting their reality-bending music in the Pacific Northwest, a far more structured response to the supernatural was taking shape on the opposite coast. In 1964, following what official records would only refer to as the P7 incident, the United States government made a decision that would fundamentally alter humanity's relationship with the paranormal. They established the Federal Bureau of Control, an organization so secretive that most government officials didn't even know it existed. The P7 incident itself remains one of the most heavily redacted events in FBC history. What we do know is that it involved a catastrophic breach of reality that threatened to expose the existence of paranatural phenomena to the general public. The incident demonstrated beyond any doubt that the strange, the impossible, and the utterly inexplicable were not merely folklore or Cold War paranoia, but genuine threats that required immediate containment. The FBC was born from this crisis, designed from its inception to operate in the shadows, protecting the public from truths that could shatter the consensus reality most people took for granted. The Bureau's primary mission was deceptively simple in its statement, but staggeringly complex in its execution. They were tasked with studying and containing what they termed altered world events, or AWEs. These were incidents where the normal rules of reality broke down, where the impossible became terrifyingly real. An AWE might be a house that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, a street where gravity reversed itself, or a town where every resident suddenly spoke in prophecies. These events left scars on reality itself, places where the membrane between our world and something else had worn dangerously thin. Equally important to the FBC's mandate was the identification and containment of objects of power, often abbreviated in Bureau documentation as UPs. These were ordinary items, mundane objects from everyday life that had somehow become conduits for paranatural forces. A typewriter that could rewrite reality, a telephone that connected to dimensions beyond human comprehension, a simple rubber duck that could alter probability fields. The defining characteristic of an object of power was this transformation of the familiar into the extraordinary, and the Bureau quickly learned that these objects were far more common than anyone had initially suspected. The early days of the FBC were marked by a scramble to establish protocols for phenomena that defied conventional understanding. The organization recruited heavily from military intelligence communities, bringing in personnel who already possessed security clearances and, more importantly, the psychological resilience to confront impossible realities without breaking. These first agents were pioneers in every sense, developing containment procedures through trial and error, often at great personal cost. Many of these early operatives suffered what Bureau psychologists would later classify as resonance trauma, a condition where exposure to paranatural phenomena left permanent alterations to an individual's perception of reality. The Bureau's early research into parapsychology and extra-dimensional phenomena was necessarily experimental. Traditional scientific methods often failed when applied to subjects that could change their properties based on observation or belief. The FBC had to develop entirely new frameworks for understanding causality, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself. This research drew from diverse fields including quantum mechanics, psychology, anthropology, and occult traditions that mainstream science had long dismissed. The Bureau learned quickly that dismissing something as superstition or myth was often the first step toward a catastrophic containment failure. The most significant discovery in the FBC's early years came when Bureau scouts identified a building in New York City that defied conventional architecture and physics. The oldest house, as it came to be known, was a brutalist structure that appeared to occupy a fixed location in Manhattan, but whose interior dimensions and layout bore no relationship to its external appearance. The building was vast beyond measure, containing spaces that couldn't possibly fit within its outer walls. More remarkably, the structure was alive in some fundamental sense. It shifted and changed its internal configuration, growing new rooms, sealing off corridors, and rearranging itself according to principles that no one could quite determine. The oldest house wasn't simply a building that violated the laws of physics, it was a place of power, a location where the barriers between dimensions were naturally thin, where reality itself was more flexible and responsive to conscious will. The building had existed for far longer than its brutalist exterior suggested, perhaps for centuries or even millennia, wearing different architectural skins across the ages while its essential nature remained constant. Previous occupants had included various secret societies and government agencies, each leaving their mark on the structure's ever-shifting interior. Recognizing the strategic value of such a location, the FBC moved quickly to claim the oldest house as its headquarters. The building offered natural containment for the paranatural objects and entities the Bureau was collecting. Its shifting nature meant that dangerous items could be isolated in pocket dimensions within the structure itself, separated from the outside world by layers of impossible geometry. The oldest house became more than just an office building. It became a vault, a laboratory, and a fortress all at once, the perfect headquarters for an organization dedicated to containing the impossible. Establishing the Bureau's organizational structure within the oldest house proved to be its own unique challenge. The building's tendency to rearrange itself meant that traditional office layouts were impossible to maintain. Employees learned to navigate by conceptual landmarks rather than physical directions, understanding that the route to a particular department might be different each day. Despite these challenges, the FBC managed to establish its core departments during this foundational period. The research sector became the Bureau's scientific heart, dedicated to understanding the fundamental principles underlying paranatural phenomena. These weren't simply scientists in lab coats conducting experiments, they were reality pioneers, pushing the boundaries of human knowledge into territories where conventional physics broke down entirely. Research personnel had to maintain rigorous scientific discipline while remaining open to possibilities that would make most academics question their sanity. The operations sector handled the practical work of containment and response. When an AWE occurred somewhere in the world, operations personnel were the ones who deployed to the scene, secured the area, and brought any objects of power back to the oldest house for study and containment. These agents combined military training with an understanding of paranatural phenomena, learning to fight threats that didn't always obey the normal rules of combat. The communications department served a dual purpose. Externally, they managed the Bureau's relationship with the outside world, which largely consisted of ensuring that the outside world never learned the Bureau existed. They manufactured cover stories for AWs, suppressed evidence of paranatural phenomena, and maintained the consensus reality that kept the general population blissfully unaware of the impossible. Internally, communications managed the flow of information within the Bureau itself, a task complicated by the oldest house's tendency to isolate departments from one another both physically and dimensionally. Among the brilliant minds recruited during the FBC's early years, one name would come to define the Bureau's scientific approach to the paranatural. Dr. Caspar Darling joined the organization as a young researcher, but his unique combination of scientific rigor and imaginative thinking quickly set him apart from his peers. Darling possessed the rare ability to approach impossible phenomena with both skepticism and wonder, never losing his sense of curiosity even when confronted with realities that challenged every assumption he held. Darling's rise through the FBC hierarchy was meteoric. His early work focused on developing classification systems for altered items, the broader category that included objects of power, as well as items that exhibited paranatural properties without necessarily granting power to their users. He understood intuitively what many of his colleagues struggled to accept, that these objects weren't simply violating physical laws. They were operating according to different laws, rules that emerged from the intersection of human consciousness, belief, and some fundamental substrate of reality that existed beneath the material world. What made Darling particularly valuable to the Bureau was his ability to communicate complex paranatural concepts in ways that field agents and administrators could understand and apply. He began producing video presentations, educational materials that explained the unexplainable with a combination of scientific terminology and accessible analogies. These presentations would become legendary within the Bureau, both for their informational content and for Darling's enthusiastic, almost childlike wonder at the phenomena he described. The early FBC agents who worked alongside Darling and other pioneering researchers were a unique breed. Many came from military special forces or intelligence agencies, individuals who had already proven their ability to operate under extreme stress and maintain operational security. But the Bureau needed more than just soldiers or spies. They needed people who could confront a reality-warping entity or an object of power that defied all logic and still maintain their psychological stability. The psychological screening for FBC agents was more rigorous than any other government agency, because the cost of mental breakdown in the field could be catastrophic, not just for the agent, but for reality itself. Training protocols for these early agents had to be developed from scratch. How do you prepare someone to enter a building where the laws of physics are merely suggestions? How do you teach containment procedures for an object whose properties might change based on who's observing it? The Bureau developed training programs that combine traditional tactical instruction with meditation techniques, psychological resilience training, and exposure to controlled paranatural phenomena. Agents learned to trust their instincts even when those instincts contradicted everything their senses told them, because in the world of the preternatural, intuition was often more reliable than empirical observation. The FBC quickly realized that simply identifying objects of power and altered world events was not enough. They needed a place to keep them, a secure location where these reality-bending artifacts and phenomena could be studied without endangering the wider world. The solution came from the oldest house itself. The building's non-Euclidean geometry, its ability to shift and reconfigure its internal spaces, made it the perfect prison for the impossible. In 1964, the FBC established the first containment sector within the oldest house, a specialized wing dedicated entirely to housing dangerous UPs and AWE remnants. This wasn't just a warehouse. The containment sector was designed with layers of redundant security, incorporating both conventional methods and experimental paroutilitarian technology. Each object of power was placed in its own containment cell, isolated from others to prevent potential interactions between artifacts that might amplify their effects or trigger cascading failures. The architecture itself became part of the containment strategy. The oldest house's natural resistance to conventional physics meant that even if an object breached its immediate cell, the building could theoretically reconfigure to trap it within an ever-shifting maze of corridors and rooms. With a secure storage facility in place, the FBC turned its attention outward. Early FBC expeditions were sent to investigate reported anomalies and potential AWE sites across the globe. These field teams, composed of agents trained in both conventional investigation techniques and basic paroutilitarian theory, traveled to remote locations where reality seemed to fray at the edges. They investigated towns where all the residents had vanished overnight, forests where compasses spun wildly and time moved at inconsistent rates, and buildings that appeared on no maps yet stood in plain sight. Each expedition was carefully documented, with agents filing detailed reports that would form the foundation of the FBC's growing database of anomalous phenomena. These early missions were dangerous. Agents often returned changed, if they returned at all. Some reported encounters with entities that existed partially in our reality and partially elsewhere. Others described places where the laws of physics operated according to different rules, where gravity might reverse without warning or where solid matter became permeable. The FBC learned through trial and error, developing protocols for approaching and investigating AWE sites. They discovered that certain materials, particularly lead and specific alloys, could provide limited shielding against some paroutilitarian effects. They learned that AWs often left behind residual energy that could be measured with modified Geiger counters and other adapted instruments. These field investigations generated enormous amounts of data, but data alone wasn't enough. The FBC needed tools, technology that could interact with phenomena that conventional science insisted couldn't exist. Throughout the mid-1960s, the FBC developed its first experimental technology to interact with and study extra-dimensional phenomena. This was uncharted territory. The scientists and engineers working in the oldest house were essentially inventing a new branch of physics, one that acknowledged the existence of forces and dimensions beyond the observable universe. They created devices that could detect fluctuations in local reality, instruments that measured the strength of what they began calling paroutilitarian fields. They built containment vessels using materials that seemed to naturally resist alteration, substances that maintained their properties even when exposed to objects of power. One of their most significant early inventions was the hadron resonance amplifier, though at this stage they didn't yet know what hadron was. The device was designed to amplify and stabilize beneficial paroutilitarian energies while dampening hostile ones. Early prototypes were unstable and dangerous, but they proved the concept that technology could be built to interface with the impossible. As the FBC's understanding deepened, patterns began to emerge from the chaos. Researchers noticed that AWEs didn't occur randomly. They seemed to cluster around specific locations, places where the barrier between our reality and others was naturally thin. The concept of thresholds and their role in AWEs began to be understood by FBC researchers. A threshold, they theorized, was a weak point in the fabric of reality, a place where the membrane separating dimensions was permeable. These thresholds could be naturally occurring, the result of geological or cosmic conditions that the FBC didn't yet fully understand, or they could be created artificially through the use of objects of power or through specific rituals and actions. The town of Ordinary Washington, where the slide projector had been found, appeared to sit on a particularly powerful threshold. The FBC began mapping these locations, creating a global database of known and suspected threshold sites. They discovered that many ancient sacred sites, places of worship and ritual going back thousands of years, corresponded with threshold locations. This suggested that humans had always been subconsciously aware of these places, drawn to them without understanding why. The FBC realized that controlling access to thresholds was crucial to preventing AWEs. If they could monitor these sites and intervene when unusual activity was detected, they might be able to contain reality-altering events before they spread. The work was complex and dangerous, requiring skills that went beyond conventional training. The FBC started recruiting individuals with latent paratiliterian abilities for specialized roles. These weren't people who could fly or shoot energy from their hands, not yet. These were individuals with subtle gifts, people who could sense when reality was becoming unstable, who could navigate the shifting corridors of the oldest house without getting lost, who seemed naturally resistant to the psychological effects of prolonged exposure to objects of power. The FBC developed tests to identify these individuals, psychological evaluations, and exposure trials that could reveal paratiliterian potential. Some recruits came from within the government, intelligence operatives who had encountered the unexplainable during their careers and had proven they could handle it without breaking. Others were civilians, people who had survived AWs and demonstrated unusual resilience or ability. The FBC offered them purpose, a chance to use their strange gifts in service of something larger than themselves. These paratiliterian specialists formed the core of the FBC's most sensitive operations, the agents who could enter containment cells that would drive normal humans mad, the researchers who could handle objects of power without immediately succumbing to their influence. But even as the FBC grew in capability and understanding, its leadership began to realize they weren't working alone. Strange messages started appearing in official communications, texts that no one remembered writing, directives that seemed to come from nowhere. The board, an extra-dimensional entity, began to communicate with and guide the FBC's leadership. The board didn't communicate in conventional language. Its messages came through automatic writing, through dreams, through patterns in static and white noise. The director and senior leadership would find themselves compelled to write or speak words they didn't consciously choose, messages that provided guidance, warnings, and instructions. The board's language was strange, fragmented, using slashes between words to indicate multiple simultaneous meanings. Contain, control, the breach, opening, a message might read, or the house structure serves, protects. At first, the FBC's leadership was understandably alarmed. Were they being manipulated by a hostile entity? Was this some form of psychic attack? But the board's guidance proved accurate. Following its cryptic instructions led to successful containment operations, helped the FBC avoid disasters, and accelerated their understanding of paratiliterian phenomena. Gradually, a relationship developed, a partnership between the FBC and this entity from beyond normal space. The board seemed to have its own agenda, its own reasons for wanting AWs contained and objects of power secured, but those reasons aligned with the FBC's mission. The relationship was formalized, with the director serving as the primary conduit for the board's communications. As the FBC's operations expanded, communication became a critical challenge. The oldest house's shifting architecture made conventional phone lines and radio systems unreliable. Messages would be sent to offices that no longer existed or had moved to different floors. The FBC established the first version of its internal communication network, later known as the hotline. This wasn't a simple telephone system. The hotline was built using technology derived from objects of power, a communication network that existed partially outside normal space. It allowed FBC personnel to contact each other regardless of where they were in the oldest house, with calls routing through some extra-dimensional exchange that bypassed conventional limitations. The hotline had strange properties. Conversations over it sometimes included voices that didn't belong to either party, whispers and fragments from other calls or other times. Agents reported receiving calls from colleagues who were standing right next to them, or from people who had died years earlier. The FBC documented these anomalies but continued using the system because it worked, because it was the only reliable way to maintain communication within the oldest house's impossible geometry. The theoretical framework supporting all this work continued to evolve. Early FBC research explored the possibility of parallel dimensions and their interaction with reality. The prevailing theory was that our universe existed alongside countless others, separated by dimensional barriers that were normally impermeable but could be breached under specific conditions. These parallel dimensions operated according to different physical laws, different fundamental constants. Some might be similar to ours with only minor variations, while others could be so alien that matter and energy as we understand them couldn't exist there. Always occurred when these dimensions touched, when the barrier between them broke down and the laws of one reality began to bleed into another. Objects of power were theorized to be items that had been exposed to multiple dimensions simultaneously, objects that existed in a quantum superposition of different reality states. This was why they could violate physics, why a simple slide projector could transport people to other dimensions. It wasn't magic. It was the artifact operating according to the physical laws of a different universe while existing in ours. One dimension in particular captured the FBC's attention. The FBC began to document the existence of the astral plane and its connection to objects of power. The astral plane wasn't like other dimensions. It seemed to be a space between spaces, a realm of pure thought and energy that existed adjacent to all realities. Agents who had been exposed to certain objects of power reported visions of this place, a vast expanse of floating geometric shapes and shifting colors, where consciousness could exist without a physical body. The astral plane appeared to be the source of paratiliterian energy, the place from which objects of power drew their reality-altering capabilities. The FBC theorized that the board resided in the astral plane, that its communications were reaching across from that realm into ours. Understanding the astral plane became a priority, though actually accessing it safely remained beyond the FBC's capabilities in these early years. All this knowledge was valuable, but the FBC's primary mission remained protection and containment. The FBC developed its first methods for shielding against and containing the effects of hostile AWEs. They created portable generators that could project stabilization fields, temporary bubbles of reinforced reality that could slow or halt the spread of an AWE. They developed personal protective equipment for agents, suits lined with materials that provided limited resistance to reality alteration. They established protocols for quarantine and evacuation, procedures for clearing civilian populations from areas where an AWE was developing. These methods were crude by later standards, often as dangerous as the phenomena they were meant to contain, but they worked well enough to prevent several potential catastrophes during the 1960s. The FBC stopped an AWE in rural Montana that was causing buildings to phase in and out of existence. They contained an object of power in Chicago that was transforming anyone who looked at it into living statues. Each successful operation refined their techniques, added to their knowledge base, made them slightly better prepared for the next crisis. Through all of this, one role emerged as central to the FBC's operations. The FBC started to understand the importance of the director's role as a conduit to the board. The director wasn't just an administrator. The position carried paratiliterian significance, a resonance with the oldest house and with the forces the FBC sought to control. The director could navigate the building instinctively, could sense when containment was failing, could communicate with the board more clearly than anyone else. The position required someone with both administrative capability and paratiliterian sensitivity, someone who could make impossible decisions while maintaining their sanity in an environment that constantly challenged the nature of reality itself. The FBC began to understand that the director was bound to the oldest house in ways that went beyond employment, that accepting the position meant becoming part of the building's strange ecology, a human element in its non-human architecture. This realization would shape how the FBC selected its future directors and would have profound consequences for everyone who took on that role. In 2010, decades after the Federal Bureau of Control had begun cataloging altered world events and studying the paranatural forces that shaped them, one of the most significant AWEs in American history was about to unfold in the Pacific Northwest. The small logging town of Bright Falls, Washington, population roughly 9,000, had long existed in relative obscurity, nestled in the shadow of Cauldron Lake and surrounded by dense forests that seemed to swallow light itself. What happened there over the course of one September week would not only reshape the lives of everyone involved, but would send ripples through the very fabric of reality, creating connections that the Bureau would spend years attempting to understand and contain. Alan Wake, a best-selling thriller novelist from New York City, arrived in Bright Falls with his wife Alice during the first week of September. Wake had built his career on psychological thrillers that explored the darker corners of the human mind, books with titles like The Sudden Stop and The Creator's Dilemma that had earned him both critical acclaim and commercial success. But success had come with a price. For the past 2 years, Wake had been unable to write, trapped in a creative paralysis that left him staring at blank pages and empty screens. The writer's block had become so severe that it was affecting his marriage, his mental health, and his sense of identity. Alice, a professional photographer who had documented much of Alan's career, suggested the trip to Bright Falls as a way to escape the pressures of New York and perhaps rediscover the inspiration that had abandoned him. The town itself seemed almost deliberately designed to be forgotten. Main Street featured the usual collection of small-town establishments, a diner called the Oh Dear Diner, a radio station, KBFM, run by a conspiracy-minded DJ named Pat Main, and various shops that catered to both locals and the occasional tourist drawn by the area's natural beauty. The local sheriff's department, headed by Sheriff Sarah Breaker, maintained order in a place where serious crime was rare. Most residents worked in the timber industry or in service jobs supporting it, living lives that followed predictable rhythms. The town's most notable feature was Cauldron Lake, a body of water that locals regarded with a mixture of reverence and unease, though few could articulate exactly why the lake made them uncomfortable. Alan and Alice's destination was a cabin on an island in the middle of Cauldron Lake, a location that Alice had arranged through a woman who identified herself as a rental agent. The cabin was isolated, accessible only by a small ferry, exactly the kind of retreat that might help a blocked writer find his voice again. What Alan didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the cabin had once belonged to Thomas Zane, a poet and filmmaker who had lived in Bright Falls decades earlier. Zane's history had been almost completely erased from the town's collective memory, his works destroyed or lost, his very existence reduced to fragments and half-remembered stories. The cabin itself was a nexus, a thin place where the boundary between the waking world and something else, something that existed beneath or behind reality, had worn dangerously thin. The first night at the cabin began pleasantly enough. Alice had set up the space as a surprise for Alan, transforming one of the rooms into a writing studio complete with a typewriter, hoping that the romantic gesture might help break through his creative paralysis. But Alan's reaction was not what she had hoped. Instead of gratitude, he felt ambushed, manipulated. his writer's block thrown into sharp relief by the expectation that this place, this setup, would somehow fix him. The argument that followed was sharp and painful, the kind of fight that comes from months of accumulated frustration and fear. Alice, hurt by Alan's response, retreated from the confrontation. She stepped outside onto the cabin's deck, and that was when the Dark Presence made its move. The Dark Presence, an ancient entity that had existed in Cauldron Lake for untold centuries, perhaps millennia, was not simply a monster or a ghost. It was a force, a consciousness born from or residing in a place that existed outside normal reality, a realm that would later be understood as the Dark Place. This entity fed on creative energy, on the power of stories and the human capacity to shape reality through narrative. It was drawn to artists, to those whose minds could bridge the gap between imagination and existence. Alice, afraid of the dark since childhood, became the perfect lure. The Dark Presence manifested as a figure, a shape that wore Alice's form but was not Alice, and it pulled her into the lake's black waters. Alan, hearing Alice's scream, ran to save her. He saw her in the water, saw her sinking, and without hesitation dove in after her. The lake's water was not merely cold, it was wrong, thick, and resistant, and as Alan swam deeper, reaching for his wife, the darkness closed around him like a fist. He blacked out, his consciousness severed from his body, and when he woke, everything had changed. Alan came to behind the wheel of his car, which had crashed off a mountain road. Rain hammered against the windshield. His head throbbed, his body ached, and he had no memory of how he had gotten there. More disturbingly, he had no clear memory of the past week. It was September the 10th, a full 7 days after he and Alice had arrived at the cabin. The cabin itself, when he tried to return to it, was gone. The island empty, as if no structure had ever stood there. Alice was missing, and no one in Bright Falls seemed to remember her at all. The rental agent who had arranged the cabin didn't exist. The keys Alan carried opened nothing. It was as if the entire experience had been a delusion, except for one crucial detail, the manuscript pages. Alan found the first pages scattered near the crash site, sheets of paper covered in his own handwriting, part of a manuscript for a thriller called Departure. He didn't remember writing them. He didn't remember writing a single word in 2 years, let alone a full manuscript. But the pages described events in vivid detail, events that were happening around him. They described his car crash. They described people he was about to meet. They described violence and horror that was beginning to unfold in Bright Falls. The manuscript was predicting reality, or perhaps creating it, and Alan had no idea how or why. As Alan searched for answers and for Alice, he encountered the Taken. These were residents of Bright Falls, ordinary people who had been consumed by the Dark Presence, their bodies and minds twisted into weapons. The darkness that possessed them was literal and visible, a writhing shadow that clung to their forms and made them immune to conventional harm. They attacked with farm tools, with axes and hammers, their movements jerky and wrong, their voices echoing with malevolent whispers. But Alan discovered that light could hurt them, could burn away the protective darkness and make them vulnerable. Flashlights became weapons, flares became grenades, and any source of illumination could provide temporary safety. The mechanic was simple but absolute. Light destroys darkness, creativity fights corruption, and stories have power. The manuscript pages Alan continued to find revealed more than just immediate events. They contained backstory, context, explanations for what was happening. Through these pages, Alan learned about the Dark Presence's nature, about its hunger for creative minds, about its desire to escape the confines of Cauldron Lake. The entity had been trapped there, bound by some previous confrontation, but it was using Alan's own creative power to break free. Every word he had written while in the Dark Place, every scene he had crafted during that lost week, was giving the Dark Presence more influence over reality, more ability to manifest in the waking world. Alan's friend and literary agent, Barry Wheeler, arrived in Bright Falls looking for him. Barry was everything Alan was not: loud, cheerful, dressed in loud shirts, and perpetually optimistic despite working in the cynical world of New York publishing. Barry's presence provided both comic relief and genuine support. He believed Alan's increasingly wild story, or at least he was willing to act as if he did, and his loyalty never wavered even as the situation grew more dangerous. Together, they navigated Bright Falls' increasingly hostile environment, seeking answers from locals who seemed to be hiding something, who spoke in half-truths and looked away when questioned about the lake. Sheriff Sarah Breaker became an unlikely ally. She was competent, skeptical, and deeply protective of her town, but she was also willing to consider evidence that contradicted her understanding of reality. Breaker had seen strange things in Bright Falls, incidents that didn't fit into conventional explanations, and Alan's arrival seemed to be triggering an escalation of phenomena that she could no longer ignore. She provided access to police resources, to files and records that hinted at Bright Falls' hidden history, and she stood between Alan and those who wanted to dismiss him as delusional or dangerous. The name Thomas Zane appeared repeatedly in Alan's investigation. Zane had been a poet and amateur filmmaker who lived in Bright Falls in the 1970s, though the exact dates were difficult to pin down because records of his existence had been systematically erased. Zane had loved a woman named Barbara Jagger, and he had lived in the cabin on Cauldron Lake, the same cabin where Alan and Alice had stayed. Something had happened to Zane and Barbara, something involving the dark presence, and Zane had fought back using the only weapon available to him, his art. He had written Barbara and himself out of existence, sacrificing everything to contain the entity and prevent it from spreading beyond the lake. The act had succeeded, but at tremendous cost. Zane became a ghost, a presence that existed in the dark place but retained some measure of his humanity and his purpose. This benevolent remnant of Thomas Zane began communicating with Alan through visions and through light. He appeared in flickering television screens, in sudden illuminations, always offering guidance or warnings. Zane understood what Alan was facing because he had faced it himself. He knew the dark presence's tactics, its ability to exploit doubt and fear, its hunger for the creative spark that could give it form and freedom. Zane's messages were often cryptic, filtered through the distortion of existing between worlds, but they provided Alan with crucial insights into how to fight back. Alan discovered that the dark presence had a name, or at least a manifestation that could be named Scratch. This was not simply the entity itself, but a corruption of Alan, a dark reflection born from his fears, his anger, and his writer's block. Scratch represented everything destructive in Alan's psyche, given form and purpose by the dark presence. It was Alan without conscience, without love, a creature that would use his creative gifts to spread darkness rather than illuminate truth. The manuscript pages revealed that Scratch wanted to escape into the real world, to take Alan's place, and to use his identity to create horrors that would feed the dark presence indefinitely. As the dark presence, a malevolent, extra-dimensional entity that feeds on fear and creativity, attempted to fully manifest within our reality at the Cauldron Lake Lodge, Alan Wake, a celebrated but troubled writer, understood the dire implications. He had witnessed firsthand the devastating power of this entity, its ability to twist reality and transform ordinary people into murderous Taken. With Alice, his wife, now a victim of its influence, seemingly lost to the depths of Cauldron Lake, Alan knew he had to act. He confronted the dark presence directly, not with weapons, but with the only tool he truly possessed, his imagination. In a desperate surge of creative will, Alan began to write a new ending, a new narrative for the unfolding horror. This was the manuscript for Departure, a story crafted not for publication, but for survival. Within its pages, he meticulously wove a new reality, one where Alice could be saved. To execute this new ending, Alan required a focal point, a conduit for his rewritten reality. He possessed the clicker, a seemingly innocuous household item from his childhood, which had been imbued with powerful psychic energy by his mother. This clicker, a symbol of light and protection, became the key. With the words of departure flowing from his pen, Alan used the clicker to banish the dark presence. The entity, which had been on the precipice of fully breaking through the veil between dimensions, was violently repelled, forced back into the murky depths of Cauldron Lake, its prison for centuries. This act, however, came at a profound cost. To complete the story, to truly seal the dark presence away and ensure Alice's safety, Alan had to offer a sacrifice. He willingly trapped himself within the dark place, the extra-dimensional realm where the dark presence resided and from which it drew its power. In doing so, he became a new vessel, a new anchor for the entity, ensuring its continued containment, but at the price of his own freedom. With Alan's sacrifice, the rewritten reality took hold. Alice Wake, who had been pulled into Cauldron Lake by the dark presence, was found safe and unharmed, washed ashore. The trauma of her ordeal, however, had been profound, and her memory of the terrifying events was completely erased. She had no recollection of the dark presence, the Taken, or Alan's heroic actions. For her, it was as if a bad dream had simply faded. Left to deal with the immediate aftermath of these inexplicable occurrences were Alan's best friend and agent, Barry Wheeler, and Sheriff Sarah Breaker of Bright Falls. They had witnessed enough to know that something profoundly unnatural had transpired, and the sheer strangeness of it all defied any conventional explanation. The town, while no longer actively under the dark presence's direct assault, still bore the scars of its influence, and the lingering questions would continue to haunt them. Barry, in particular, was deeply affected, his easygoing nature now tinged with a newfound understanding of the world's hidden horrors. Sheriff Breaker, a woman of duty and pragmatism, found her worldview irrevocably altered, grappling with events that defied all logic and law. Unbeknownst to the local inhabitants, the dramatic events in Bright Falls had not gone unnoticed by higher powers. The Federal Bureau of Control, or FBC, a clandestine U.S. government agency tasked with investigating and containing paranormal phenomena, detected a significant anomaly radiating from Cauldron Lake. This anomaly was immediately classified as an Altered World Event, or AWE, a term that FBC uses to describe instances where the laws of reality are significantly distorted or broken. The sheer scale and intensity of the energy signature emanating from Bright Falls indicated an AWE of unusual potency. The FBC swiftly established a containment zone around Bright Falls, deploying highly trained agents and specialized equipment. This was not a public declaration of a supernatural event, but a covert operation designed to maintain public ignorance and prevent widespread panic. The town was effectively quarantined, with FBC personnel subtly integrating themselves into the local infrastructure, posing as various government agencies or private contractors. Their primary objective was to investigate the Cauldron Lake AWE, to understand its origins, its nature, and its potential implications for the wider world. The FBC's presence was a meticulous operation, designed to be as inconspicuous as possible while still allowing for thorough investigation. They established temporary research facilities, deployed sensory equipment to monitor the anomalous energy, and began interviewing local residents, albeit under the guise of routine surveys or investigations into unrelated matters. Among the FBC agents dispatched to Bright Falls was Dr. Casper Darling, a brilliant but eccentric scientist who would later become the head of research for the FBC. Darling, with his insatiable curiosity and unconventional approach, was particularly intrigued by the unique properties of Cauldron Lake. He recognized that this was not merely a localized disturbance, but a manifestation of something far more profound. His early studies of the lake's water samples revealed unusual energetic signatures and microscopic distortions of reality, hinting at its role as a threshold to another dimension. Darling's initial reports emphasized the lake's inherent instability, its capacity to amplify and manifest subjective realities, particularly those influenced by creative thought. He theorized that the lake acted as a kind of interdimensional amplifier, making it a focal point for the dark presence. Based on the initial findings and the sheer magnitude of the reality shifts observed, the FBC officially classified the events in Bright Falls as a Type 5 AU. This designation is reserved for the most severe and impactful altered world events, those that pose a significant threat to the fabric of reality itself and have the potential for widespread, catastrophic consequences. A Type 5 AWE indicates not just a localized anomaly, but a fundamental breach or distortion of reality on a scale that demands the highest level of FBC intervention and resources. The implications of a Type 5 AWE are profound, suggesting that the very laws of physics and existence have been fundamentally challenged and altered. During their meticulous investigation of the containment zone, FBC personnel began to discover scattered remnants of Alan Wake's manuscript pages. These were not ordinary pieces of paper, they were physical manifestations of his creative act, imbued with the very reality-altering power he had channeled. The FBC's initial analysis of these pages confirmed their unique properties. Words written on them had a demonstrable effect on the immediate environment, subtly reshaping reality according to their narrative. This discovery was a groundbreaking moment for the FBC, providing concrete evidence of the link between subjective creative thought and objective reality. It validated their understanding of objects of power and altered items, but on a scale previously unimaginable. The pages were not merely descriptions of events, they were the events themselves, given form. This confirmed the FBC's suspicion that the AWE was directly tied to a powerful creative force, specifically a writer. The FBC's work in Bright Falls extended beyond immediate containment. They recognized that even with the dark presence seemingly banished, its influence lingered. The residual energy, the subtle distortions of reality, and the potential for future manifestations required ongoing monitoring and active containment. Specialized FBC teams were deployed to track and neutralize these lingering effects, often employing countermeasures and utilizing objects of power to stabilize the local reality. This involved continuous surveillance of the lake, analysis of local flora and fauna for anomalous mutations, and psychological assessments of Bright Falls residents who might have been subtly affected by the AWE. The FBC's goal was not just to prevent another outbreak, but to understand the long-term consequences of such a powerful reality-altering event. They established protocols for dealing with echoes of the dark presence, subtle psychic imprints or minor reality distortions that could manifest in the containment zone. To explain away the strange occurrences and maintain public ignorance in Bright Falls, the FBC concocted an elaborate cover story. They established the Old Gods of Asgard, a fictitious, eccentric rock band, as the source of the town's peculiar phenomena. This narrative was carefully crafted to be just plausible enough to be dismissed as local folklore or the antics of aging rock stars, while simultaneously providing a convenient explanation for any minor, inexplicable events that might slip through the FBC's containment efforts. The Old Gods of Asgard, with their outlandish stage personas and a history of bizarre behavior, became the perfect scapegoat, allowing the FBC to operate in the shadows, their true mission concealed behind a veil of rock and roll eccentricity. This cover story was so effective that it became deeply ingrained in the local culture, a testament to the FBC's mastery of information control and psychological manipulation. The legend of the Old Gods provided a convenient, non-threatening narrative for the townsfolk, allowing them to rationalize the strange occurrences without ever suspecting the true, terrifying nature of the AWE that had gripped their home. Our timeline now shifts forward to 2012, a mere 2 years after the cataclysmic events at Cauldron Lake. But for Alan Wake, time and reality have become far more fluid. He remains trapped within the dark place, a nightmarish dimension of shifting realities and existential dread, born from the collective unconscious and amplified by the supernatural energies of the Old Gods of Asgard. This isn't a physical prison in the conventional sense, but a psychological and spiritual one, where the very fabric of existence is malleable, shaped by thought, fear, and most powerfully, by the act of creation itself. For Alan, a writer, this means his words possess an unprecedented, terrifying power. In this surreal prison, Alan is desperately attempting to write his way out, a recurring theme in his struggle against the dark presence. He understands, on some fundamental level, that his only hope for escape lies in crafting a narrative compelling enough and potent enough to manifest his freedom. This endeavor is not without its perils, for the dark place feeds on despair and twists intentions. Every word he writes, every character he invents, every plot twist he devises, risks becoming another chain binding him to this dark realm, or worse, empowering the very entity that seeks to consume him. While Alan grapples with his internal demons and the external pressures of the dark place, a horrific manifestation of his own making is wreaking havoc in the real world. This is Mr. Scratch, Alan's evil doppelganger, a distorted reflection of himself, now fully materialized and operating with malicious intent. Mr. Scratch isn't merely a figment of imagination or a spectral presence. He is a tangible, physical entity, capable of interacting with and corrupting the physical world. His presence is most acutely felt in the fictional town of Night Springs, Arizona, a setting that, ironically, draws its name from a television show Alan himself once wrote for. Mr. Scratch is a direct consequence of the dark presence's corrupting influence on Alan's persona. When Alan was pulled into the dark place, the entity, being a force of pure darkness and negativity, latched onto the most vulnerable and unsavory aspects of his celebrity. It amplified his anxieties, his self-doubt, his resentment towards the demands of fame, and the darker impulses that lurk beneath the surface of any public figure. The result was Mr. Scratch, a creature born from the shadow of Alan's success, a grotesque caricature of the charming, witty, and talented writer the world knew. He embodies everything Alan fears he might become: vain, cruel, and utterly devoid of empathy. The actions of Mr. Scratch are not random acts of villainy. They are calculated, insidious attempts to erase Alan's very existence by replacing him. He commits heinous acts, often with a theatrical flair, designed to discredit Alan, to tarnish his reputation, and to sow chaos in his wake. These acts are not just physical crimes, but psychological warfare. He seeks to dismantle Alan's legacy, to make people believe that Alan Wake, the celebrated author, was always a monster, or that he has finally succumbed to madness. By stepping into Alan's shoes, literally and metaphorically, Mr. Scratch aims to usurp his identity, to become the definitive Alan Wake, thereby trapping the true Alan in the dark place forever, and perhaps even erasing him from the collective memory of the living. Adding another layer of surrealism to Alan's predicament, his struggle within the dark place is being broadcast, in a twisted, metafictional sense, on television within that very dimension. This is the story he is writing, titled Night Springs, which depicts his desperate fight against Mr. Scratch. It's a cruel irony, a writer's personal hell becoming the subject of a macabre reality show, playing out on screens within the nightmare itself. This broadcast serves multiple purposes. It is a manifestation of Alan's creative process, a way for the dark place to process and reflect his efforts, and perhaps a subtle form of torture, forcing him to witness his own torment as entertainment. The characters within this televised narrative, the setting, the unfolding plot, are all direct products of Alan's struggling imagination. Crucially, Alan's writing within the dark place has a direct and profound influence on the reality of Night Springs. This isn't mere storytelling, it's reality bending. As he crafts his narrative, the very landscape of Night Springs shifts and reforms. Locations appear or disappear, events transpire as he describes them, and characters emerge from the depths of his subconscious, brought to life by the power of his words. This is the fundamental mechanism of the dark place. Art made real. It's both his greatest weapon and his greatest vulnerability, for while he can shape reality, so too can the dark presence twist his creations against him. It is within this malleable reality that Alan encounters Emma Sloan, a pragmatic and resourceful mechanic. Emma is not a real person in the conventional sense, but a character within Alan's Night Springs story, brought into existence by his creative will. Her presence underscores the blurred lines between fiction and reality within the dark place. As a character, she is designed to assist Alan, to provide him with the tools and information he needs to combat Mr. Scratch. Her skepticism and down-to-earth nature serve as a grounding force in the increasingly bizarre landscape of Night Springs, a reflection of Alan's own desire for logic and reason in a world that defies both. Through his interactions with Emma and his observations of Mr. Scratch's escalating depravity, Alan begins to piece together the full scope of his doppelganger's plan. Mr. Scratch isn't just content with replacing Alan, he is attempting to bring about the end of the world. This isn't a literal apocalyptic event in the traditional sense, but a corruption of reality itself, a descent into madness and chaos orchestrated by the dark presence through its proxy. Mr. Scratch seeks to dissolve the boundaries between nightmare and reality, to plunge the world into a state of perpetual darkness and fear, mirroring the very nature of the dark place. His actions, from vandalizing landmarks to committing violent crimes, are all part of a larger ritual, a macabre performance designed to weaken the fabric of reality and allow the dark presence to fully manifest in the waking world. To combat this existential threat, Alan must fully embrace his role as the author of his own destiny. He uses his writing, his most potent weapon, to manipulate events within Night Springs, to subvert Mr. Scratch's plans, and to create opportunities for himself. He writes in solutions, introduces new elements, and alters existing circumstances, all in an effort to gain an advantage over his malevolent counterpart. This often involves a delicate dance, as each alteration risks unintended consequences, but it is a necessary gamble. He is literally rewriting reality on the fly, a testament to the immense power concentrated within the dark place and his own creative spirit. Central to Alan's struggle and his ability to influence reality are the pages of his manuscript. These aren't just drafts or notes, they are fragments of his story, Night Springs, that have manifested physically within the dark place. Each page details future events, often with an eerie prescience, acting as both a guide and a self-fulfilling prophecy. As Alan collects these pages, he gains crucial insights into Mr. Scratch's next moves, allowing him to anticipate and counter his enemy. More importantly, these pages also provide him with tools and weapons, not in a literal sense of finding a gun on a page, but in the way that the narrative itself conjures solutions. A description of a powerful flashlight on a page might cause one to appear in his immediate vicinity, or a passage detailing a weakness of Mr. Scratch might reveal a way to exploit it. These pages are the tangible evidence of his power, the keys to unlocking his escape, and the very fabric of the reality he is desperately trying to control. His journey through Night Springs becomes a quest to reclaim these scattered fragments of his own creation, each one a step closer to understanding and ultimately defeating the terrifying entity that wears his face. His journey through this nightmarish Arizona landscape, a twisted reflection of his own creation, was punctuated by relentless combat. Alan found himself constantly battling the Taken, those unfortunate souls corrupted by the dark presence and now mere puppets in the hands of Mr. Scratch. These were not just nameless monsters, they were people, their minds twisted, their bodies imbued with supernatural strength, and a terrifying resistance to conventional harm. He witnessed firsthand the chilling transformation of ordinary individuals into these monstrous figures, their eyes glowing with an unnatural malevolence. Each encounter was a desperate struggle for survival, forcing Alan to rely on his wits and the one weapon that proved consistently effective against the encroaching darkness: light. As he delved deeper into this fabricated reality, Alan began to uncover the true nature of his doppelganger. Mr. Scratch, he realized, was not simply a manifestation of the dark place's power. He was a creature fueled by fear and negative emotions, a parasitic entity that fed on despair and amplified the worst aspects of human nature. This understanding was a crucial turning point, offering Alan a glimmer of hope that there might be a way to starve the monster of its sustenance. The more terror Mr. Scratch inflicted, the stronger he became, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of dread that Alan desperately needed to break. During his desperate search for answers, Alan encountered Serena Valdivia, an astronomer, who became an unexpected ally and a vital source of exposition within the narrative. Serena, a character Alan himself had created, found herself caught in the same bizarre loop, experiencing the same nightmarish events repeatedly. Her scientific mind, though bewildered by the supernatural phenomena, offered a unique perspective. She spoke of celestial mechanics, of the sun's predictable rise, and of the cosmic dance that governed their reality, however distorted. It was through Serena that Alan began to grasp the true extent of Mr. Scratch's malevolent plan. The doppelganger was actively attempting to prevent the sunrise, understanding that the light of dawn would significantly weaken him, perhaps even destroy him. This revelation solidified Alan's immediate objective. He had to ensure the sun rose. Against the encroaching shadows, Alan's primary weapon remained light. Flashlights, flares, and even streetlights became crucial tools in his arsenal. The Taken recoiled from its intensity, their shadowy forms dissolving under its purifying glow. This reliance on light was not merely a gameplay mechanic. It was a thematic cornerstone, symbolizing hope, truth, and the inherent human desire to push back against the unknown. Each burst of light was a small victory, a temporary reprieve from the overwhelming darkness that threatened to consume everything. He learned to manage his light sources, to strategically deploy flares to stun groups of enemies, and to focus his flashlight beam to burn away the darkness clinging to the Taken, making them vulnerable to conventional firearms. Later in his journey, Alan encountered Dr. Rachel Meadows, a professor specializing in folklore and mythology. Like Serena, Dr. Meadows was a character from Alan's own story, yet she possessed an independent awareness within this nightmare. Her academic insights provided a different lens through which to view the unfolding events. She spoke of ancient myths, of primordial fears, and of the power of belief to shape reality. Dr. Meadows' knowledge of narrative structures and symbolic archetypes helped Alan to understand the deeper, more metaphysical aspects of his predicament. She theorized about the nature of the dark place itself, suggesting it was a realm where fiction and reality blurred, where the power of a storyteller could literally reshape the environment. Her discussions about the psychological impact of fear and the universal human struggle against inner demons resonated deeply with Alan's own internal battles. Through these encounters and his own harrowing experiences, a profound realization began to dawn on Alan. He was not merely a victim in this terrifying narrative, he was its author. The key to defeating Mr. Scratch permanently, he understood, lay not in physical combat alone, but in the act of writing. He had to craft a specific ending to his story, one that would permanently excise his malevolent doppelganger from existence. This was his true power, the ability to manipulate reality through the written word, a power both terrifying and exhilarating. The weight of this responsibility was immense, for a single wrong word could mean perpetual torment. The climax of Alan's ordeal arrived in a final, desperate confrontation with Mr. Scratch. This was not a battle of bullets and flashlights, but a clash of narratives, a duel of wills fought on the canvas of reality itself. As Alan wrote, his words took tangible form, directly impacting the environment and the actions of Mr. Scratch. He described the sunrise, its golden rays piercing the perpetual gloom, and with each stroke of his pen, the fictional world around him began to shift and respond. The very fabric of the dark place, subservient to its creator, began to bend to his will. In a triumphant act of creation, Alan successfully penned a scenario where Mr. Scratch was utterly consumed and destroyed by the rising sun. The narrative unfolded as he wrote it, the light intensifying, Mr. Scratch screaming in agony as a shadowy form disintegrated into nothingness. The relief was immense, a wave of exhaustion and victory washing over Alan. He believed, in that moment, that he had finally defeated his tormentor and, more importantly, escaped the clutches of the dark place. The nightmare, he thought, was over. However, the dark place, a realm of insidious deception and endless iteration, had one final cruel twist in store. Alan's victory, though real within the confines of that specific narrative loop, proved to be temporary. He remained trapped, caught in an unending cycle, forced to rewrite the events repeatedly. Each time he reached the triumphant ending, the dark place reset, presenting him with the same challenges, the same enemies, and the same terrifying doppelganger. This was the true horror of his predicament, an eternal struggle, a narrative prison from which there seemed to be no permanent escape. The sun would rise, Mr. Scratch would be destroyed, and then, inevitably, the darkness would return, demanding another performance, another struggle for survival. The experience of Alan Wake's American Nightmare, therefore, serves as a crucial illustration of the dark place's relentless nature, its ability to ensnare and manipulate even the most powerful creators, and its capacity for infinite, agonizing repetition. It cemented the understanding that escaping its clutches would require more than just a single, well-written ending. It would demand a fundamental shift in the very rules of its existence. We've seen how the world of Alan Wake is shaped by the dark presence and the power of artistic creation. Now, we shift our focus to an equally enigmatic force, one that will eventually intertwine with Wake's own story, the Hiss, and the organization dedicated to containing it. Our next entry on the timeline, number 5, takes us to the year 2002, with events echoing into 2019 as we delve into the origins of Control. This is the Ordinary AWE, or Altered World event, a pivotal moment that not only introduces us to the Hiss, but also to Jesse Faden, the future director of the Federal Bureau of Control. In 2002, the sleepy town of Ordinary, Maine was just that, ordinary. It was home to a young Jesse Faden and her younger brother, Dylan. Like any other family, the Fadens gathered for what was meant to be a simple, joyful occasion. However, this gathering would be anything but ordinary. During the seemingly innocuous family reunion, a seemingly innocuous object of power, the slide projector, was inadvertently activated. Objects of power are everyday items, mundane objects like a refrigerator, a phone, or in this case, a slide projector, that have been altered, imbued with supernatural properties by an extra-dimensional force. They defy the laws of physics, operating under their own unique, often unpredictable, rules. This particular slide projector, a seemingly harmless device for projecting family photos, held a far more sinister secret. When the slide projector was activated, it didn't just project images onto a screen. It tore a hole in reality. It opened a portal, a gateway to another dimension, a place beyond human comprehension. From this rift poured forth an entity unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, the Hiss. The Hiss is an extra-dimensional entity, a resonant, corrupting force that exists as a pervasive, malevolent hum. It doesn't have a physical form in the traditional sense, but rather manifests as a red, crystalline corruption, twisting and distorting reality and infecting living beings with its influence. It is a collective consciousness, a parasitic intelligence that seeks to assimilate and control. As the Hiss flooded into Ordinary, it immediately began its insidious work. The adults present at the gathering, including Jesse and Dylan's parents, were the first to fall victim. The Hiss possessed them, their minds and bodies becoming mere puppets, their voices replaced by the ominous echoing whispers of the Hiss Collective. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural red light, their movements becoming jerky and unnatural. The once familiar faces of their loved ones were now grotesque masks of Hiss-controlled malevolence. The idyllic family gathering rapidly descended into a nightmare, a scene of terror and unimaginable horror for the two children. Jesse and Dylan, however, were spared the full brunt of the Hiss's corruption, at least initially. They were exposed to the entity, yes, but crucially, they were protected. The slide projector, the very object of power that had unleashed the Hiss, also possessed a unique resonance, a protective frequency that shielded them. This resonance, a kind of psychic imprint left by the object of power, acted as a barrier, preventing the Hiss from fully possessing their minds. But while it protected them from complete assimilation, it didn't leave them unchanged. Instead, the prolonged exposure to the Hiss and the slide projector's resonance had a profound and lasting effect on the Faden siblings, granting them supernatural abilities. Jesse, in particular, developed a strong empathic connection to objects of power and a nascent form of telekinesis, while Dylan exhibited a heightened sensitivity to the Hiss itself, a susceptibility that would later prove to be both a blessing and a curse. The chaos in Ordinary did not go unnoticed. The sheer scale and nature of the event, the radical alteration of reality, was too significant to be contained by conventional means. This was an Altered World Event, or AWE, a term used by a clandestine government organization to describe incidents where paranormal forces break through into our reality, often with devastating consequences. The organization tasked with dealing with such events is the Federal Bureau of Control, or FBC. The FBC is a secretive agency operating beneath the surface of the United States government, dedicated to studying, containing, and ultimately understanding the paranormal. They are the first and last line of defense against threats from other dimensions and against objects of power run amok. Upon detecting the Ordinary OW, the FBC swiftly moved in. Their response was immediate, decisive, and ruthless. A perimeter was established, isolating the entire town. All communication in and out was cut, and a comprehensive cover-up operation was initiated. The official story disseminated to the public was a gas leak or a chemical spill, anything to explain away the bizarre occurrences and the sudden disappearance of an entire town from the map. The FBC's primary objective was containment, to prevent the Hiss from spreading beyond Ordinary and to secure any objects of power involved. During their sweep of the quarantine town, the FBC discovered Jesse and Dylan Faden. It quickly became apparent that Dylan, with his heightened sensitivity to the Hiss, was a unique case. The Bureau recognized his potential, not as a threat to be eliminated, but as a prime candidate, a term used to describe individuals who exhibit an unusual aptitude for interacting with objects of power or who possess unique psychic abilities, often making them potential future directors of the FBC. Dylan's susceptibility to the Hiss, while dangerous, also made him a valuable asset, a potential conduit for understanding the entity. He was taken into custody by the FBC, his future now inextricably linked to the Bureau's clandestine operations. Jesse, however, proved to be more elusive. Even at a young age, her nascent supernatural abilities, particularly her developing telekinesis, allowed her to evade the FBC's grasp. Whether through sheer luck, instinct, or the nascent guidance of an unseen force, Jesse managed to slip through the Bureau's containment, becoming a ghost in the system. Her escape marked the beginning of a long and arduous journey, one driven by a profound sense of guilt and responsibility. She had been unable to save her parents, unable to save her brother, and that burden weighed heavily on her young shoulders. For 17 long years following the Ordinary AU, Jesse Faden lived on the fringes, constantly searching. Her quest was twofold: to find Dylan, her lost brother, and to uncover the truth about the FBC, the shadowy organization that had taken him. Her search was relentless, a solitary crusade fueled by an unwavering determination. She followed every lead, every whisper, every obscure piece of information that hinted at the Bureau's existence. This relentless pursuit led her to various FBC cover-up sites, places where the Bureau had intervened in other AWEs, leaving behind subtle but discernible traces of their presence. These sites, often dismissed by the mainstream as urban legends or conspiracy theories, became Jesse's breadcrumbs. She delved into fringe theories, poring over esoteric texts, online forums, and whispered rumors, slowly but surely piecing together the puzzle of the Bureau's existence. Each discovery, each confirmation of an FBC intervention, brought her closer to understanding the true nature of the world, a world far stranger and more dangerous than most people could ever imagine. Throughout her long search, Jesse was not entirely alone. She developed a unique and profound psychic connection with an entity she came to call Polaris. Polaris is an enigmatic, benevolent entity, a resonant frequency that originates from the same dimension as the slide projector, the very object of power that triggered the Ordinary AW. Polaris acts as a guide, a silent internal compass, offering Jesse subtle nudges, intuitive insights, and a protective presence. It is a constant companion, a source of strength and direction, its whispers echoing in her mind, guiding her through the labyrinthine world of the paranormal and towards her ultimate destination, the oldest house, the headquarters of the Federal Bureau of Control, and the key to finding Dylan and understanding the truth. This connection to Polaris is a testament to Jesse's unique sensitivity and her role as a chosen individual, destined for a far greater purpose than she could ever have imagined. Her journey, born from the trauma of the Ordinary OW, was slowly but surely leading her to the heart of the FBC, to a confrontation with the Hiss, and to a destiny intertwined with the very fabric of reality itself. In 2019, Jesse Faden's relentless search for answers, fueled by the traumatic events of the Ordinary AWE and the cryptic guidance of Polaris, finally culminates in her arrival at the Federal Bureau of Control's headquarters, the oldest house, nestled inconspicuously within the concrete canyons of New York City. This seemingly ordinary skyscraper, a brutalist monolith, is in fact a place of power, a shifting, sentient entity that exists outside conventional spatial and temporal laws, accessible only to those it permits. Its true nature, an architectural anomaly that defies logic, is immediately apparent as Jessie steps inside. However, her arrival coincides with a catastrophic event. The oldest house is in lockdown, plunged into chaos by a full-scale invasion of the Hiss. This otherworldly, resonant entity, characterized by its crimson glow and disorienting, echoing whispers, has breached the Bureau's defenses, corrupting personnel and warping the very fabric of the building. The Hiss, a hostile, extra-dimensional force, manifests as a pervasive, mind-altering resonance that infects and possesses individuals, twisting their thoughts and actions into a grotesque parody of their former selves. It also distorts the environment, transforming familiar spaces into nightmarish, shifting landscapes. As Jessie navigates the hiss-infested corridors, she stumbles upon a grim scene. The deceased director Zachariah Trench, the previous head of the FBC, slumped in his office. His death, a consequence of the Hiss invasion, leaves a power vacuum. In his final spectral moments, Trench, through an unexplained mechanism tied to the oldest house's inherent sentience and the nature of objects of power, designates Jessie as his successor. This transfer of authority is not merely symbolic. It is a metaphysical act, recognized by the oldest house itself. Jessie is immediately thrust into the unenviable role of director, inheriting Trench's service weapon, a powerful object of power that can transform into various weapon forms, and the crushing burden of leading the FBC against an existential threat. This isn't a job she applied for, it's a destiny thrust upon her by a dying man and a sentient building. As the new director, Jessie quickly learns the horrifying truth behind the Hiss invasion. The entity's breach wasn't entirely accidental. It was orchestrated in part by a possessed Dr. Casper Darling, the FBC's brilliant but eccentric head of research. Darling, driven by an insatiable scientific curiosity and a desire to understand the unknown, had been deeply researching the Hiss, attempting to harness its power or at least comprehend its nature. His experiments, however, inadvertently opened a pathway for the Hiss to enter the oldest house, and in its pursuit of knowledge, Darling himself became a primary vessel for the entity. His distorted, Hiss-corrupted broadcasts, laced with twisted scientific pronouncements, echo throughout the oldest house, serving as a chilling testament to the dangers of unchecked intellectual ambition. The Hiss, a being of pure resonance, had found a willing, albeit unwitting, conduit in Darling's desperate quest for understanding. Among the many urgent tasks confronting Jessie, a deeply personal one emerges: the discovery that her brother, Dylan Faden, is being held in the Panopticon. This high-security FBC prison, a towering, brutalist structure within the oldest house, is designed to contain altered individuals, those with supernatural abilities, and objects of power that pose a threat to normalcy. Dylan, having been taken by the FBC after the ordinary AWE and subjected to extensive testing and observation due to his own latent supernatural abilities and his connection to the slide projector, has been a prisoner here for years. His incarceration, a direct consequence of the Bureau's efforts to contain and study the unknown, has weighed heavily on Jessie's conscience, fueling her quest for answers and for him. The Panopticon, with its labyrinthine corridors and isolated cells, represents the FBC's cold, clinical approach to the supernatural, and Dylan's presence there is a stark reminder of the Bureau's past actions. Upon finally reaching the Panopticon, Jessie confronts a Hiss-corrupted Dylan. The brother she remembers, the innocent boy from Ordinary, is gone, replaced by a vessel for the Hiss. His eyes glow with the crimson light of the entity, and his voice, though still recognizably his, is imbued with the echoing resonance of the Hiss. Dylan, twisted by years of confinement, experimentation, and now possession, expresses a profound resentment towards Jessie. He blames her for his abandonment, for her escape from the FBC's clutches while he remained imprisoned, and for her perceived freedom. This confrontation is a painful mirror of their shared trauma, amplified by the Hiss's manipulative influence, which feeds on negative emotions and amplifies existing grievances. Dylan, under the Hiss's sway, becomes a tragic figure, a victim of both the FBC's methods and the entity's malevolent power. His resentment is a sharp, personal blow to Jessie, adding another layer of emotional complexity to her already overwhelming mission. During her journey through the oldest house and her interactions with surviving FBC personnel, Jessie uncovers a disturbing truth. The ordinary AW, the traumatic event that shaped her life and led to Dylan's capture, was not a random occurrence. It was a deliberate experiment orchestrated by Trench and Darling to study the slide projector's dimension. Their ambition, fueled by the Bureau's relentless pursuit of understanding and control over the supernatural, led them to actively provoke an altered world event, a breach in reality, to observe its effects firsthand. They believed they could control the variables, contain the fallout, and extract invaluable knowledge from the slide projector's unique properties. This revelation shatters Jessie's perception of the FBC as a purely reactive organization. It exposes a darker, more proactive side willing to manipulate reality for scientific gain, even at the cost of innocent lives. The ordinary ABI, which had been a source of profound suffering for Jessie and Dylan, was not an accident but a calculated risk, a cold, scientific endeavor with devastating personal consequences. Trench and Darlene, in their hubris, had played with forces they barely understood, and the Hiss invasion was, in many ways, a direct consequence of their reckless experimentation. As Jessie delves deeper into the mysteries of the oldest house and the Hiss, she realizes the true nature of Polaris, the enigmatic entity that has guided her since childhood. Polaris is not merely a benevolent spirit or a figment of her imagination. It is a fragment of the slide projector's original entity, a benevolent counterforce to the Hiss. This revelation clarifies Polaris's consistent guidance, its protective influence, and its subtle nudges toward specific goals. Polaris, a being of pure light and order, seeks to restore balance to the universe, which has been disrupted by the Hiss's chaotic presence. It is a manifestation of the slide projector's inherent desire for equilibrium, a conscious fragment that has attached itself to Jessie, recognizing her unique connection to the Altered World event and her potential to combat the Hiss. Polaris's presence within Jessie's mind is not a possession, but a symbiotic relationship, a guiding light in the encroaching darkness, a constant reminder of her purpose and the vital role she plays in the cosmic struggle. Armed with this newfound understanding and the formidable power of the service weapon, Jessie battles the Hiss throughout the oldest house. Her mission is multifaceted, to cleanse corrupted areas, restoring them to their original state and neutralizing the Hiss's influence, to rescue and restore FBC personnel who have been possessed or trapped by the Hiss, bringing them back from the brink of the entity's control, and to unravel the deeper mysteries of the Hiss's origins and its connection to the oldest house itself. Each cleansed sector, each rescued agent, is a small victory against the overwhelming tide of the Hiss, a testament to Jessie's growing power and resolve. She learns to harness the oldest house's shifting architecture, using its inherent strangeness to her advantage, and mastering the service weapon's various forms to combat the diverse threats posed by the Hiss-corrupted entities. Her journey is a relentless fight for survival, a desperate attempt to reclaim the oldest house from the invading force, and to understand the true nature of the supernatural world she's been thrust into. Ultimately, Jessie's path leads her to confront the very source of the Hiss within the oldest house, aiming to contain the threat and, crucially, to rescue Dylan from its clutches. The climax of her initial journey involves a direct confrontation with the Hiss Prime, the central consciousness of the entity, or at least its most powerful manifestation within the oldest house. This confrontation is not just a physical battle, it is a struggle for the very soul of the FBC, for the fate of Dylan, and for the balance of reality itself. Jessie's ultimate goal is to sever the Hiss's connection to the oldest house, to expel it from this place of power, and to prevent its spread beyond the Bureau's walls. Her journey is a testament to resilience, a story of a young woman forced to confront unimaginable horrors, not just for herself, but for the countless others threatened by the Hiss, and for the brother she has spent her life searching for. The ordinary AW, which began as a personal tragedy, has now spiraled into a cosmic conflict, and Jessie Faden, the reluctant director, stands at its epicenter, guided by Polaris and driven by an unwavering determination to bring order back to a world gone mad. We now arrive at a pivotal moment in our timeline, the year 2019, which marks the beginning of the events depicted in the game Control. After decades of searching, Jessie Faden, a woman deeply scarred by a childhood altered world event, AWE, finally arrives at the oldest house, the clandestine headquarters of the Federal Bureau of Control, FBC. Her quest is deeply personal, to uncover the truth behind the disappearance of her younger brother Dylan, who was taken by the FBC after the AWE in their hometown of Ordinary, Maine, 17 years prior. Jessie's journey to this hidden, shifting skyscraper in the heart of New York City is not accidental. She has been guided by an extra-dimensional entity known only as Polaris, a resonant protective presence that has been with her since the Ordinary AWE. Polaris, an entity of pure light and consciousness, acts as a psychic anchor and a source of nascent paratiliterian abilities for Jessie, subtly influencing her path and preparing her for what lies ahead. Upon entering the oldest house, a building that defies conventional physics and architectural norms, Jessie finds herself in a state of uncanny quiet. The FBC, a secretive government agency tasked with investigating and containing paranormal phenomena, appears deserted. The silence is unnerving, a stark contrast to the bustling, bureaucratic image one might expect from such an organization. As she navigates the labyrinthine corridors, guided by an inexplicable instinct and the subtle promptings of Polaris, Jessie eventually makes her way to the executive sector, the administrative heart of the Bureau. Here, amidst the opulent yet strangely sterile office spaces, she discovers a gruesome scene: the lifeless body of Director Zachariah Trench, the long-serving head of the FBC. Trench's death is not immediately explained, but the circumstances are clearly unnatural, hinting at a deeper, more insidious threat. His body lies slumped in his office, a single ornate revolver, the service weapon, lying beside him. Driven by an instinct she doesn't fully comprehend, Jessie picks up the service weapon. This is no ordinary firearm, it is an object of power, a mundane item imbued with immense supernatural energy, and one of the most potent in the FBC's arsenal. As her fingers close around its cold, metallic grip, the weapon undergoes a profound transformation. It shifts and reforms, molding itself to her touch, signifying its acceptance of her. In this moment, a profound metaphysical event occurs. The service weapon bonds with Jessie, and through this bonding, she is designated as the new director of the Federal Bureau of Control. This is not a bureaucratic appointment, but a supernatural one, recognized by the oldest house itself and the entities that govern its reality. The service weapon, a sentient and powerful artifact, chooses its wielder, and in doing so, bestows upon them the authority and responsibility of the directorship. This sudden elevation to the highest office within the FBC, an organization she barely understands, is a testament to Jesse's unique connection to the paranormal, a connection amplified by Polaris. No sooner has Jessie assumed her new, unexpected role than the oldest house is plunged into chaos. An extra-dimensional entity, a malevolent force known as the Hiss, invades the Bureau. The Hiss is a resonant, consciousness-altering phenomenon that originates from a dimension referred to as the astral plane. It manifests as a pervasive crimson glow, accompanied by a discordant, guttural chanting that infiltrates the minds of its victims, twisting their thoughts and corrupting their physical forms. The Hiss seeks to spread its influence, to subsume all reality into its own chaotic dimension. Its arrival is sudden and devastating, transforming the familiar architecture of the oldest house into something alien and hostile. Walls shift, floors contort, and FBC personnel are possessed, their bodies becoming grotesque, floating husks, their voices replaced by the echoing hiss chant. In the midst of this unfolding catastrophe, Jessie experiences another profound connection. Through the hotline, a unique object of power that serves as a psychic communication device, she is contacted by the board. The board is a mysterious, enigmatic entity, or collective of entities, residing in the astral plane, a dimension of pure thought and primordial energy. It communicates through a series of cryptic, often contradictory pronouncements, presented in a distorted, multi-voiced echo. The board acts as a kind of governing body for the FBC, overseeing the directorship and the containment of paranormal threats. It is their will that the director serves, and it is through them that the service weapon draws much of its power. The board, observing the Hiss invasion, immediately recognizes Jessie's legitimate claim to the directorship and begins to guide her, albeit in its characteristically opaque manner, toward understanding and combating the threat. As Jessie navigates the Hiss-infested corridors, she quickly learns the terrifying scope of the invasion. The Hiss is not merely a physical threat, it is a mental and spiritual one. It corrupts FBC personnel, turning them into hostile, levitating entities that attack on sight. These Hiss-corrupted individuals retain some semblance of their former selves, often muttering fragments of their past lives, but their minds are utterly subsumed by the Hiss's resonant frequency. The Hiss also profoundly alters the environment of the oldest house, twisting its reality, creating impossible geometries and manifesting physical barriers of Hiss-infused matter. Jessie witnesses firsthand the devastating efficiency of this extra-dimensional entity as it systematically dismantles the Bureau's defenses and infects its personnel. The urgency of her mission becomes clear. She must fight back, not just for herself, but for the entire FBC and, by extension, for reality itself. Armed with the service weapon and her nascent paratiliterian abilities, which are amplified by Polaris and her connection to the board, Jessie begins her desperate fight against the Hiss. Her powers, initially limited to telekinetic launches and a powerful dodge, grow as she confronts the Hiss and interacts with other objects of power. She learns to manipulate the environment, hurling debris at enemies, creating protective shields, and eventually even levitating herself. The service weapon, her primary tool, is equally versatile, transforming into various forms, from a rapid-fire pistol to a powerful shotgun, adapting to the needs of combat. Each confrontation with the Hiss is a brutal test of her resolve and her developing abilities. She battles through waves of Hiss-corrupted agents, using her powers and the service weapon's shifting forms to overcome their numbers and their otherworldly attacks. Her mission is not just to survive, but to contain the Hiss and save the FBC from utter annihilation. Early in her desperate struggle, Jessie encounters Emily Pope, the head of research for the FBC. Emily is a brilliant pragmatic scientist, initially wary of Jessie's sudden appearance and her claims to the directorship. However, as Jessie demonstrates her abilities and her unwavering commitment to fighting the Hiss, Emily quickly becomes her primary ally and an invaluable source of information. Emily, despite the chaos, remains remarkably composed and analytical, providing Jessie with crucial insights into the nature of the Hiss, the lore of the oldest house, and the functions of various FBC departments and technologies. She acts as Jessie's guide through the Bureau's complex systems and protocols, offering strategic advice and scientific explanations for the paranormal phenomena Jessie encounters. Emily's scientific rigor and her deep understanding of the FBC's operations are a perfect complement to Jessie's intuitive, paratiliterian approach, forming a formidable partnership against the Hiss. With Emily's guidance and her own burgeoning powers, Jessie focuses on clearing the executive sector, the initial point of the Hiss invasion. This sector, being the administrative core, is critical for the FBC's operations. By systematically eliminating Hiss strongholds and purifying corrupted areas, Jessie begins to restore some semblance of functionality to the Bureau. This involves activating control points, which are designated areas within the oldest house that, once cleansed of Hiss, can be used to fast travel and provide a measure of safety. Clearing the executive sector is a monumental task, requiring Jessie to confront numerous Hiss-corrupted agents, including more powerful, specialized variants. Each victory in this sector is a small but significant step towards reclaiming the oldest house and pushing back the hiss. The act of cleansing these areas not only restores the physical space, but also begins to break the hiss's mental hold on the environment, allowing some FBC personnel to slowly recover from their corruption. During her exploration and combat, Jessie frequently discovers the existence of objects of power. These are ordinary, mundane items, such as a rotary phone, a floppy disk, or refrigerator, that have been imbued with immense supernatural energy through exposure to altered world events or other paranormal phenomena. Each object of power possesses unique abilities and often requires a ritualistic awe to bond with a para-utilitarian, granting them specific powers or enhancing existing ones. The service weapon itself is the most powerful and unique object of power, capable of shifting its form and choosing its wielder. Jessie's encounters with these objects are crucial to her development, as each successful awe expands her repertoire of para-utilitarian abilities, giving her new ways to combat the hiss. She learns to launch objects with telekinesis from a simple filing cabinet, to shield herself from damage using a projector, and even to levitate herself by bonding with a specific object of power. These objects are not merely tools. They are fundamental components of the oldest house's reality, each with its own story and its own connection to the wider paranormal world. As Jessie delves deeper into the FBC's archives and consults with Emily, she learns about altered items and altered world events, or AWEs. Altered items are objects that have been subtly changed by paranormal forces, often exhibiting minor, localized supernatural effects, like a perpetually warm coffee cup or a clock that always runs backwards. They are distinct from objects of power, which possess much greater, more overt supernatural abilities. Altered world events, on the other hand, are large-scale, often catastrophic paranormal occurrences that fundamentally alter reality within a specific geographical area. The ordinary AWE, which scarred Jessie's childhood, is a prime example. These events are the primary focus of the FBC's investigations and containment efforts. Jessie realizes that her own past is intrinsically linked to the very phenomena the FBC is designed to manage, and that her unique connection to Polaris and her para-utilitarian abilities are direct consequences of the ordinary AWE. The FBC's entire mission revolves around identifying, containing, and studying these AWEs and the altered items they often leave in their wake. With the executive sector partially secured, Jessie's next critical task, as relayed by Emily and the board, is to restore power to the oldest house. The Hiss invasion has severely disrupted the Bureau's energy infrastructure, plunging many sectors into darkness and rendering vital systems inoperable. The primary source of power for the oldest house is the NSC power plant, located deep within the maintenance sector. Without power, the FBC cannot effectively contain the Hiss, operate its research facilities, or even maintain the oldest house's shifting architecture. This mission highlights the interconnectedness of the oldest house's systems and the pervasive nature of the Hiss's disruption. Jessie understands that restoring power is not just a practical necessity, but a strategic imperative, a crucial step in regaining control of the Bureau. The maintenance sector, known for its industrial machinery and complex power grids, presents a new set of challenges, both environmental and Hiss-related. As Jessie makes her way towards the maintenance sector, she encounters one of the oldest house's most enigmatic and beloved figures, Ahti, the Finnish janitor. Ahti is no ordinary maintenance worker. He is an ancient, possibly extra-dimensional entity who appears to possess an intimate understanding of the oldest house's true nature, its shifting realities, and the deeper workings of the paranormal. He speaks in cryptic, poetic pronouncements, often using Finnish phrases and metaphors, offering Jessie guidance and tasks that, while seemingly mundane, like fixing a clogged pipe or retrieving a lost item, invariably lead her to significant discoveries or aid her in her fight against the Hiss. Ahti seems to operate outside the conventional hierarchy of the FBC, possessing a unique authority and a calm, detached perspective on the unfolding chaos. He sees Jessie's potential, her connection to Polaris, and her role as director with a clarity that few others possess. His tasks, often presented as janitorial duties, are in reality profound tests and opportunities for Jessie to grow her powers and deepen her understanding of the oldest house. Following Ahti's cryptic directions and the imperatives of her mission, Jessie ventures into the maintenance sector. This area is a stark contrast to the polished offices of the executive sector, characterized by its industrial aesthetic, exposed pipes, and massive machinery. The Hiss has thoroughly infiltrated this sector, corrupting its systems and its personnel. Her objective is the NSC power plant, but before she can reach it, she must confront a significant Hiss-corrupted threat: the foreman, Billiam. Billiam, once a diligent FBC foreman responsible for the maintenance sector's operations, has been completely subsumed by the Hiss. He manifests as a powerful, aggressive Hiss agent, capable of manipulating the industrial environment to his advantage, using heavy machinery and telekinetic blasts to attack Jessie. This encounter is a direct obstacle to restoring power, a personification of the Hiss's deep infiltration into the Bureau's critical infrastructure. Jessie's battle with Billiam is a test of her combat prowess and her ability to adapt to the Hiss's varied manifestations within the oldest house's diverse environments. Defeating him is essential to progressing deeper into the maintenance sector and ultimately reactivating the NSC power plant, which is the next crucial step in her fight to reclaim the FBC from the Hiss. The fight with Billiam is a gritty, visceral encounter, demonstrating the Hiss's ability to turn even the most ordinary FBC employees into formidable, monstrous adversaries. It underscores the personal cost of the Hiss invasion, as Jesse is forced to fight former FBC colleagues, now twisted beyond recognition by the extra-dimensional entity. This section of the oldest house, with its exposed machinery and industrial hazards, adds another layer of complexity to the combat, requiring Jessie to utilize the environment to her advantage while contending with the Hiss's aggressive tactics. The pervasive red glow of the Hiss and the incessant, guttural chanting create an atmosphere of oppressive dread, amplifying the urgency of Jesse's mission to restore order and light to the darkened, corrupted sector. Picking up in 2019, Jesse Faden's journey through the oldest house intensifies as she reactivates the NSC power plant. This massive brutalist structure, a vital organ of the FBC's headquarters, hums with a raw, untamed energy. Its dormant state had crippled the oldest house's inherent, shifting architecture, leaving swathes of the building vulnerable and unstable. By bringing the NSC back online, Jesse not only stabilizes the FBC's energy output, ensuring critical systems remain operational, but also symbolically reasserts a measure of control over the chaotic environment. The hum of the reactivated plant resonates through the building, a palpable shift in the oldest house's very being. This act of restoration is not merely technical. It is a profound affirmation of Jesse's burgeoning role as director, a demonstration of her ability to mend and manage the oldest house's complex, almost living systems. The power surge ripples through the FBC, allowing for the restoration of light and function to previously dark and inaccessible areas, further opening the oldest house's secrets to Jesse's investigation. Her quest for answers next leads her to a chilling discovery, the P7 program. This classified initiative, shrouded in the FBC's characteristic secrecy, was a series of experiments designed to identify and cultivate individuals with exceptional pro-utilitarian abilities. The FBC, ever eager to harness and weaponize the supernatural, saw these gifted individuals as potential assets, or perhaps as potential threats to be contained. The revelation strikes Jessie with a personal blow as she learns that her own brother, Dylan Faden, was a prime candidate within this program. The FBC had been aware of Dylan's extraordinary abilities since the ordinary AWE, and rather than offering protection or understanding, they had subjected him to rigorous, ethically dubious testing within the oldest house. This discovery paints a darker picture of the FBC, revealing a willingness to exploit and manipulate even children for their own ends, a stark contrast to the organization's public facade of protection and research. The P7 program, in essence, was a breeding ground for potential parahumans, a desperate attempt by the FBC to understand and control the unpredictable nature of altered events and objects of power. The files she uncovers detail the extensive psychological profiling, the controlled exposure to altered items, and the relentless observation that Dylan, among others, endured. Driven by a renewed sense of urgency, Jessie confronts and ultimately rescues Dylan from his confinement within the Panopticon, a brutalist prison sector designed to house the most dangerous altered items and individuals. Their reunion is fraught with tension and a lingering sense of estrangement. Dylan, scarred by years of isolation and experimentation, is not the innocent boy Jessie remembers. He speaks in cryptic pronouncements, his mind a fractured landscape of suppressed memories and unsettling insights. Through their fragmented conversations, Jessie gleans more about the Hiss, the malevolent, extra-dimensional entity that has invaded the oldest house. Dylan, having been exposed to the Hiss for an extended period, possesses a disturbing intimacy with its nature. He reveals that the Hiss is not merely a force of chaos, but an entity with a profound, almost philosophical understanding of existence. He speaks of it as a song, a resonant frequency that seeks to subsume and unify all consciousness. His words are not those of a victim, but of someone who has glimpsed the Hiss's true nature, a perspective that chills Jessie to her core. Dylan's history as a prime candidate for the next director, a role he was being groomed for before the Hiss invasion, further complicates matters. The FBC had seen in Dylan a unique aptitude for understanding and interacting with the oldest house, a potential successor to Trench. This makes his exposure to the Hiss all the more significant, suggesting a deliberate, or at least highly impactful interaction between the entity and a potential future leader of the FBC. A more disturbing truth emerges as Jessie delves deeper. Director Trench, her predecessor, was not merely a victim of the Hiss. He had been communicating with it, engaging in a dialogue that ultimately facilitated its invasion. Trench, a man burdened by the immense responsibility of his office and the constant threat of the unknown, had sought to understand the Hiss, to perhaps even control it. His attempts, however, proved catastrophic. He had opened a door, a conduit that allowed the Hiss to breach the oldest house's defenses, unleashing its resonant corruption upon the FBC. Jessie uncovers fragmented recordings, personal logs, and encrypted messages that paint a picture of a man teetering on the edge, seduced by the Hiss's promises of ultimate knowledge and control. This revelation casts a long shadow over Trench's legacy, transforming him from a revered leader into a tragic figure whose desperate search for answers led to unimaginable destruction. The Hiss, it seems, is not merely an invading force, but a manipulative entity capable of preying on the deepest desires and fears of its targets. Trench's ambition, his desire to master the unknown, became his undoing, and the catalyst for the oldest house's current crisis. The specific details of his communication, the hotline, calls he made to the Hiss dimension, reveal a man slowly succumbing to its influence, believing he was gaining an advantage while in reality, he was being subtly corrupted and prepared as a vessel for the invasion. With this unsettling knowledge, Jesse ventures into the research sector, a labyrinthine expanse dedicated to the FBC's most esoteric and dangerous investigations. Her objective? To find Dr. Casper Darling's research. Darling, the eccentric and brilliant head of research, had been obsessed with the Hiss, dedicating his life to understanding its origins and nature. His research, a sprawling collection of scientific papers, video logs, and experimental data, represents Jesse's best hope for finding a countermeasure. The research sector is a testament to Darling's brilliance and his increasingly unorthodox methods, filled with strange contraptions, glowing artifacts, and the lingering echoes of his frantic pursuit of knowledge. Jesse navigates through the Hiss-corrupted laboratories and archives, piecing together Darling's fragmented insights. She discovers his profound understanding of the Hiss as a resonant frequency, a vibrational pattern that infects and reshapes reality. Darling's theories were radical, even by FBC standards, but his meticulous documentation provides Jesse with a crucial roadmap. Among Darling's voluminous notes, Jesse learns about the Hedron, a powerful object of power that emits a unique counter-frequency capable of disrupting the Hiss's influence. The Hedron, a crystalline structure of immense power, was Darling's crowning achievement, his ultimate weapon against the invading entity. It functioned as a resonance amplifier, broadcasting a harmonious frequency that stabilized reality and purged the Hiss's dissonant presence. However, to Jesse's dismay, she also discovers that the Hedron has been destroyed. The Hiss, recognizing the threat it posed, had targeted and shattered the artifact, leaving the FBC without its most potent defense. The destruction of the Hedron represents a significant setback, forcing Jesse to confront the Hiss without the immediate aid of Darling's powerful invention. The loss of the Hedron underscores the Hiss's strategic intelligence and its ability to neutralize threats, making Jesse's task even more daunting. The remains of the Hedron scattered across the research sector serve as a stark reminder of the Hiss's destructive power and the FBC's vulnerability. Her search then leads her to the Black Rock Quarry, a vast, cavernous space within the oldest house, where she confronts a Hiss-corrupted Dr. Darling. This encounter is a tragic testament to the Hiss's insidious power. Darling, once a brilliant mind, is now a grotesque parody of his former self, his consciousness warped and twisted by the Hiss's influence. Yet, even in his corrupted state, fragments of his original intent remain. Through his distorted pronouncements, Jesse learns about his desperate attempts to contain the Hiss. Darling, recognizing the immense danger, had tried to build a containment field around the entity, to study it without allowing it spread. His efforts, however, were ultimately futile, and he himself became a victim of the very force he sought to understand. The confrontation with Hiss Darling is a somber moment, highlighting the personal cost of the Hiss invasion and the tragic fate of those who dared to delve too deeply into its mysteries. It's a poignant reminder that even the most brilliant minds can be consumed by the oldest house's inherent dangers. The quarry itself, a source of black rock which is a material with unique paratiliterian properties, serves as a symbolic backdrop for Darling's final, desperate stand. Following this harrowing encounter, Jesse enters the containment sector, a stark and secure area designed to imprison the most dangerous altered items and individuals. Her mission here is twofold: to secure Dylan and the other Hiss-affected individuals. The FBC, in its desperation, had rounded up all those who showed signs of Hiss infection, isolating them in this brutalist prison. Jesse's presence in the containment sector is a critical step in her plan to cleanse the oldest house, as these individuals, particularly Dylan, represent both a threat and a potential key to understanding the Hiss. The containment sector is a chilling testament to the FBC's ruthlessness, a place where human beings are treated as little more than specimens, their individuality stripped away by the Hiss's corruption and the FBC's protocols. Within the containment sector, Jesse uncovers further details about the ordinary AWE, the altered world event that irrevocably changed her life and that of her brother. She learns that the FBC had been investigating the event for years, meticulously documenting the strange occurrences and the disappearance of Dylan during the incident. The FBC's files reveal the chaotic aftermath of the AWE, the sudden appearance of the slide projector, an object of power that served as a gateway between dimensions, and the subsequent disappearance of Dylan through one of its activated slides. This information fills in crucial gaps in Jesse's own fragmented memories, providing a clearer picture of the traumatic event that shaped her destiny. The FBC's detailed, if clinical reports offer a cold, factual account of the day her world shattered, contrasting sharply with Jesse's deeply personal and emotional experience. The most alarming discovery in the containment sector is the realization that the Hiss is attempting to use Dylan as a conduit. His unique paratiliterian abilities, his inherent connection to the oldest house, and his prolonged exposure to the Hiss have made him an ideal vessel. The Hiss seeks to amplify its presence through Dylan, to spread its resonant corruption beyond the confines of the oldest house and into the wider world. This revelation elevates the stakes of Jesse's mission to an unprecedented level. The fate of not just the FBC, but potentially all of reality, rests on her ability to stop the Hiss from using her brother as a gateway. Dylan, once a victim, is now a pawn in a cosmic struggle, his very being a weapon in the Hiss's arsenal. The Hiss's strategy is clear: to exploit the most powerful and vulnerable individuals to achieve its ultimate goal of universal assimilation. With this terrifying understanding, Jesse confronts the Hiss at the heart of the oldest house, the Panopticon. This towering, multi-level structure is not merely a prison. It is a nexus of power, a place where the oldest house's inherent strangeness is amplified. The Panopticon, with its central column of light and its countless cells, becomes the final battleground. The Hiss, now fully manifested and attempting to spread through Dylan, unleashes its full force, creating a nightmarish landscape of distorted reality and aggressive, Hiss-corrupted entities. Jessie, armed with her service weapon and her growing paratilitaryan abilities, faces a seemingly insurmountable challenge. The fight in the Panopticon is a culmination of her journey, a test of her resolve and her connection to the oldest house. The very architecture of the Panopticon twists and shifts under the Hiss's influence, creating a surreal and disorienting environment that mirrors the chaos within. In a desperate climactic act, Jessie utilizes a replica of the Hedron, created from Darling's research and her own ingenuity, as a resonance amplifier. This improvised device, imbued with the counter-frequency of the original Hedron, becomes her ultimate weapon. By activating it, Jessie unleashes a wave of pure, harmonious energy that washes over the oldest house. The Hedron resonance amplifier, though not the original, proves powerful enough to disrupt the Hiss's dissonant frequency, purging its corruption from the building. The oldest house shudders, its walls groaning as the Hiss's grip loosens. The red glow recedes, replaced by the familiar, if still unsettling gray of the FBC's headquarters. The Hiss is repelled, driven back into the dimensional void from which it emerged. This act of cleansing saves the FBC, restoring a semblance of order to the oldest house and preventing the Hiss from spreading its influence beyond its walls. Jessie, having embraced her role as director, has not only survived the invasion, but has actively pushed back against the encroaching darkness, becoming the true protector of the oldest house and its secrets. The Hedron's counter-frequency, a beacon of order in the chaos, resonates through the oldest house, a testament to the power of understanding and the director's unwavering resolve. The remnants of the Hiss, however, linger, a pervasive threat that will continue to challenge Jessie and the FBC in the years to come, reminding them that the oldest house is never truly safe from the forces of the unknown. The battle is won, but the war for reality itself continues. Following the harrowing events of the main game, in 2019, the newly appointed director of the Federal Bureau of Control, Jesse Faden, faced a fresh crisis. With the Hiss contained but not eradicated and the oldest house still reeling from the invasion, a new, more fundamental threat emerged. Jesse received an urgent distress call emanating from the very bedrock of the oldest house itself, the Foundation. This was no ordinary anomaly. It signaled a profound disturbance within the structure that anchored the Bureau's headquarters to reality. As Jessie delved into the initial reports, she discovered a troubling connection to a familiar face, Helen Marshall, the enigmatic head of operations who had vanished during the Hiss invasion. Marshall, it turned out, had been conducting extensive clandestine research into the Foundation prior to her disappearance. Her cryptic notes, left behind in her office and scattered throughout classified Bureau archives, spoke of ancient energies, primordial connections, and a delicate balance underpinning the oldest house's existence. Marshall's investigations hinted at a deeper purpose for the Foundation, suggesting it was more than just a geological base, but a vital, living component of the extra-dimensional edifice. Her research logs detailed unusual energy readings, structural anomalies, and even faint, rhythmic pulses emanating from the depths, all pointing to an entity, or a mechanism, far more significant than the Bureau had previously understood. Jessie began to piece together Marshall's theories, which posited that the oldest house wasn't merely a place where altered items and altered events occurred, but was itself an altered item on a cosmic scale, constantly shifting and reacting to the forces within and around it. Marshall's later entries grew increasingly alarmed, describing a growing instability, a subtle tremor that she feared could escalate into a catastrophic event. She had been attempting to find a way to stabilize these energies, or at least understand their source, believing that the Foundation held the key to the oldest house's very survival. Compelled by the escalating crisis and Marshall's foreboding warnings, Jessie descended into the Foundation. This vast, cavernous area beneath the oldest house was unlike any other sector. It was a realm of raw, untamed power, characterized by impossibly shifting architecture that defied conventional physics. Walls would ripple and reform, pathways would appear and vanish, and gravity itself seemed to ebb and flow. Adding to the unsettling atmosphere was a pervasive, crimson crystalline growth that pulsed with an eerie light, clinging to every surface and radiating a palpable, alien energy. This growth, later identified as originating from the nail, was a manifestation of the Foundation's distress, a physical symptom of a deeper systemic illness. The air itself felt heavy, charged with an unknown potential, and the whispers of the oldest house, usually a subtle background hum, here became a cacophony of distorted echoes and unsettling murmurs. The Foundation was a place of primordial chaos, a stark contrast to the Bureau's attempts at order and control in the upper levels. It was clear that this was where the oldest house's true nature was most exposed, most vulnerable. Her journey through the Foundation quickly revealed the source of the disturbance, the Nail. This massive, inverted pyramid-like object of power was not merely a decorative artifact. It was the fundamental anchor that tethered the oldest house to reality, preventing its complete dissolution into the astral plane. But now, the Nail was fracturing. Visible cracks spiderwebbed across its obsidian-like surface, glowing with the same ominous red light that permeated the Foundation. Each fracture was a wound, a tear in the fabric of reality that threatened to unravel the very existence of the oldest house. The Nail, a cosmic keystone, was failing, and its disintegration had immediate and catastrophic consequences. The fracturing of the Nail was directly causing the Foundation to destabilize. The architectural shifts became more violent and unpredictable, entire sections of the cavern collapsing into abyssal voids or reforming into impossible geometries. Reality itself began to fray at the edges. Portals to unknown dimensions flickered into existence, spewing forth raw, chaotic energy. More alarmingly, the Hiss, the extra-dimensional entity that had recently invaded the Bureau, began to spread unchecked through these new breaches. The Hiss, previously contained within the upper levels, now found untrammeled access to the Foundation's core, their crimson glow merging with the Nail's fractured light, creating a terrifying symbiosis of destruction. The environmental hazards intensified, with localized gravity anomalies, bursts of raw energy, and spontaneous materializations of hostile entities becoming commonplace. The very air vibrated with the agony of a dying world, a world that was the oldest house itself. Amidst this escalating chaos, Jesse encountered a truly ancient and enigmatic entity, the Former. This powerful, sentient being, banished by the Board, the multi-dimensional entity that communicates with the Director through the hotline, manifested as a grotesque, multi-limbed creature of pure energy and shadow. Its voice, a distorted, echoing cacophony that seemed to emanate from all directions at once, resonated with immense power and a profound sense of injustice. The Former, an entity of immense power and ancient lineage, had been a rival, or perhaps a predecessor, to the Board in the cosmic hierarchy. Its banishment was a testament to the Board's ruthless pursuit of control and dominance. The Former spoke of a time before the Board, of a more natural order, and of its own deep connection to the oldest house and the Nail. Its existence was a living testament to the Board's manipulative nature and its long history of interfering with powerful entities and objects. Through its fragmented, often cryptic communications, the Former revealed a shocking truth. The Board's actions, specifically the relentless attempts to control and harness the power of the Nail, were the direct cause of the current instability. The Board, in its insatiable desire for order and its perceived right to govern all things, had been attempting to tune the Nail, to bend its immense power to their will. This meddling, the Former explained, was akin to trying to force a living heart to beat to an artificial rhythm. The Nail, a primordial force of nature, resisted this external manipulation, and its struggle against the Board's interference was manifesting as the devastating fractures and the subsequent destabilization of the Foundation. The Board's hubris, their belief that they could master such a fundamental object of power, had backfired spectacularly, threatening to destroy not just the oldest house but potentially entire swathes of reality. The Former painted a picture of the Board as a parasitic entity, feeding on and attempting to control sources of immense power, rather than respecting their inherent nature. As Jessie delved deeper into the Foundation and absorbed the Former's revelations, she began to understand the oldest house's true origins. It was not merely a building, not just an extra-dimensional space, but a living, breathing entity. The oldest house, in its ancient wisdom, had chosen the FBC as its stewards, its caretakers, believing them capable of understanding and protecting its delicate balance. This revelation reshaped Jessie's entire perception of the Bureau's mission. They weren't just containing anomalies. They were living within and responsible for a sentient being of immense power. The house communicated not through words, but through shifts in its architecture, subtle energy fluctuations, and even through the dreams and intuitions of those attuned to its presence. It was a symbiotic relationship, though one that the FBC, in its scientific zeal, had largely failed to fully comprehend. The house had chosen them not for their strength, but for their potential for understanding, a potential that had been largely squandered by the Board's influence. Further evidence uncovered through hidden Bureau archives and the Former's fragmented memories solidified a disturbing truth. The Board, this multidimensional entity that claimed to guide the FBC, had been manipulating both the Bureau and the oldest house for its own opaque purposes for a very long time. Their guidance, often presented as benevolent, was in fact a carefully orchestrated campaign to exert control over the oldest house's vast powers and the various objects of power within it. The Board had been subtly influencing Director Trench, pushing him towards certain research trajectories, and even orchestrating events to increase their own influence within the Bureau. Their ultimate goals remained shrouded in mystery, but their methods were clear: control, manipulation, and the subjugation of any entity or power that could challenge their dominion. The Board's true nature was revealed to be far more sinister than the benign. if somewhat aloof, benefactors they presented themselves as. They were cosmic puppeteers, pulling strings from beyond the veil of reality, using the FBC as their unwitting instruments. With the nail fracturing and the board's machinations laid bare, the boundaries between dimensions became increasingly unstable. The oldest house, no longer anchored firmly to reality, began to bleed into other planes of existence. This instability manifested in terrifying ways. New, dangerous Hiss variants, mutated and empowered by the raw dimensional energy, emerged from the breaches, exhibiting abilities and resistances previously unseen. Environmental hazards escalated beyond mere structural shifts. Localized reality warps, temporal distortions, and pockets of pure, corrosive energy became common, posing a constant threat to Jesse's survival. The Foundation transformed into a truly hostile environment, a battleground where the very laws of physics were in flux, a testament to the catastrophic consequences of the nail's fracturing. The Hiss, now infused with the essence of the Foundation's instability, became even more formidable, their crimson glow pulsating with a malevolent intelligence. To avert complete catastrophe, Jesse embarked on a perilous mission to repair the nail. The massive object of power had shattered into numerous pieces, scattered throughout the vast chaotic expanse of the Foundation. Each piece, glowing with a faint red light, pulsed with a fragment of the nail's immense power. Collecting these fragments was a monumental task, requiring Jesse to navigate the treacherous, ever-shifting landscape, battling mutated Hiss variants and overcoming increasingly dangerous environmental challenges. She had to harness her own abilities as director, using her telekinetic powers to traverse impossible gaps, her shield to deflect deadly energy blasts, and her service weapon to dispatch the relentless Hiss. Each collected piece of the nail represented a step closer to restoring the oldest house's stability, a desperate race against time to prevent the complete unraveling of reality itself. Her journey was not just a physical one, but a spiritual one, as she came to terms with the true nature of the oldest house and her role as its chosen protector. Jesse's journey into the Foundation was far from a simple exploration. The Hiss, the interdimensional entity that had invaded the oldest house, was deeply entrenched here. Corrupted by the distorted energies emanating from the nail, she found herself constantly engaged in desperate firefights, her service weapon a paratilitaryan firearm that transforms to suit the wielder's intent, glowing with the energy of her will. The Foundation presented new, more dangerous iterations of the Hiss. The Hiss, sharpened, for instance, were agile and aggressive, capable of closing distances rapidly and unleashing devastating melee attacks. Their forms were contorted, their limbs elongated and razor-sharp, a grotesque mockery of human anatomy. Then there were the Hiss cluster, grotesque amalgamations of Hiss energy, capable of spawning smaller, weaker Hiss to overwhelm their targets. These encounters were not just about survival, they were a test of Jesse's burgeoning paratilitaryan powers, pushing her to master her telekinetic abilities, her shield, and her ground slam, all while navigating the treacherous, shifting architecture of the Foundation. As she delved deeper, guided by the increasingly urgent whispers of the former, Jesse began to piece together the true nature of this enigmatic entity. The former, she discovered, was not merely an inhabitant of the oldest house, but a primordial being, once a constituent part of the board itself. The board, the mysterious, pyramid-headed entities that communicate through inverted speech and seemingly govern the Federal Bureau of Control, had not always been a singular unified consciousness. The former had been cast out, exiled to the deepest recesses of the oldest house, for the unforgivable sin of dissent. It had disagreed with the board's increasingly restrictive and absolute methods of control, believing that true stability came not from rigid enforcement, but from a more fluid, adaptable approach. This schism, this fundamental disagreement over the very nature of control, had led to the former's banishment, its power diminished, its influence severed from the greater whole of the board. This revelation cast a new, unsettling light on the board's motivations and their relationship with the oldest house. The former, now a disembodied voice and fleeting spectral presence, became Jesse's constant companion and guide. Its advice, often delivered in riddles and cryptic pronouncements, was invaluable. It spoke of the oldest house not as a mere building, but as a living, breathing organism, a paratilitaryan entity in its own right, with a will and consciousness distinct from the board. It explained that the oldest house had its own internal mechanisms for maintaining balance, its own inherent resistance to external pressures. The former's insights peeled back layers of mystery, revealing the deeper, more complex dynamics at play within the Bureau. It highlighted the board's relentless pursuit of absolute control, not just over the FBC, but over all dimensions, all realities accessible through the oldest house. This ambition, the former warned, was a dangerous one, for true stability, it argued, lay in a delicate balance, not in an iron grip. The board's methods, while seemingly effective in the short term, were ultimately destabilizing, pushing the oldest house, and by extension, reality itself, to its breaking point. Jesse began to understand that the board's true intention was not merely to contain and study altered world events, but to exert dominion over them, to harness their power for their own inscrutable ends. They sought to impose their will on the very fabric of existence, to meticulously regulate the flow of interdimensional energy, even if it meant suppressing the natural inclinations of the oldest house. This pursuit of absolute control, she realized, was the root cause of the current crisis in the Foundation. The board's attempts to manipulate the nail, to use it as a tool for their own agenda, had inadvertently triggered the dimensional instability, creating the very problem they claimed to be solving. The oldest house, a sentient and powerful entity, was actively resisting this subjugation. It was pushing back against the board's influence, attempting to reassert its own will, to restore its natural equilibrium. This internal struggle between the board's rigid control and the oldest house's organic autonomy was playing out in the very architecture of the foundation, in the shifting walls and collapsing floors, in the chaotic energies that threatened to tear reality asunder. Armed with this newfound understanding, Jessie knew she could not simply contain the hiss or repair the nail. She had to confront the source of the problem, to challenge the very authority of the board. In a dramatic confrontation, she stood before the ominous inverted black pyramid that represented the board, her voice echoing through the ethereal chamber. She questioned their motives, their methods, and their right to dictate the fate of the oldest house. She, the director, the chosen vessel of the oldest house, was not a puppet to be controlled, but a force to be reckoned with. This was a pivotal moment, a declaration of independence, not just for Jessie, but for the oldest house itself. She argued that the board's attempts to micromanage and suppress the oldest house were counterproductive, leading only to greater instability. She advocated for a more harmonious relationship, one where the oldest house's inherent nature was respected and allowed to flourish, rather than being stifled by an external, often misguided authority. Her confrontation with the board was not a battle of physical force, but of will and conviction. She articulated the former's warnings, laying bare the consequences of the board's overreach. She spoke of the delicate balance that had been disrupted, of the dangers of imposing a rigid order on a naturally chaotic system. While the board did not explicitly concede, Jessie's words clearly resonated, forcing them to acknowledge the limitations of their own power and the potential for catastrophic failure if they continued on their current path. This intellectual and spiritual clash paved the way for Jessie to take decisive action. With the board, if not fully convinced, then at least temporarily subdued by her arguments and the undeniable evidence of the Foundation's impending collapse, Jessie turned her attention to the former. The former, weakened and fragmented by its long exile, needed to regain its lost power to help stabilize the nail. This required re-establishing its connection to the nail, its original source of power and its very essence. Jessie, guided by the former's whispers and her own burgeoning intuition, began the arduous process of mending this ancient bond. This involved navigating treacherous, reality-bending puzzles and overcoming powerful hiss manifestations that guarded the remnants of the former's connection. Each step was a struggle, a testament to the immense power that had been severed and the difficulty of restoring such a fundamental link. She performed rituals not of the FBC's design, but of the oldest house's own ancient magic, tapping into the inherent energies of the Foundation. Finally, after immense effort and facing down the most formidable hiss threats yet, Jessie successfully reassembled the nail. This was not a simple act of physical reconstruction, but a parautilitarian feat of immense scale, a restitching of reality itself. The nail, once fractured and distorted, now pulsed with a steady, calming energy. The chaotic dimensional energies that had threatened to tear the Foundation apart began to recede, the tremors subsiding, the shifting architecture settling into a more stable form. The dimensional collapse, a catastrophic event that would have had far-reaching implications for the entire oldest house and potentially beyond, was averted. The Foundation, though scarred, was saved. With the nail restored and the Foundation stabilized, the former, now partially restored to its former glory, emerged from the shadows. Its form was still ethereal, but its presence was stronger, its voice clearer, imbued with a renewed sense of power and purpose. It acknowledged Jessie's pivotal role in restoring balance, recognizing her as a true director, one who understood the delicate interplay of power and control. But its message was not one of unbridled triumph. It offered a cryptic warning, a premonition of future threats, of battles yet to come. The oldest house, it implied, would always be a focal point for interdimensional forces, a nexus of power that would attract both benevolent and malevolent entities. The struggle for control, it cautioned, was an ongoing one, a constant dance between order and chaos. Through this harrowing ordeal, Jessie gained a profound understanding of her own connection to the oldest house. She realized that her role as director was not merely to manage the FBC, but to be a conduit, a protector, an integral part of the oldest house itself. She was not just a puppet of the board or a pawn in their grand schemes. She was the chosen one, the one who could bridge the gap between the board's rigid authority and the oldest house's organic will. Her experiences in the Foundation solidified her identity, empowering her with a deeper sense of purpose and belonging. She understood that her powers were not just tools, but extensions of the oldest house's own capabilities, flowing through her, guided by her will. Despite the stabilization of the Foundation, the boundaries between dimensions remained fragile. The events of the Hiss invasion and the subsequent struggle within the Foundation had left an indelible mark on the oldest house. The veil between realities had been thinned, the cracks in the fabric of existence still present, albeit temporarily mended. This fragility served as a constant reminder of the ongoing struggle for control, a subtle hint that future incursions were not just possible, but inevitable. The oldest house, though resilient, was forever changed, its defenses tested, its vulnerabilities exposed. Jesse Faden, the director, now stood at the precipice of a new era for the FBC, an era defined by constant vigilance, by the ongoing battle to maintain balance in a universe teeming with forces beyond human comprehension. The Foundation, a place of immense power and profound revelations, had been a crucible, forging Jesse into a leader truly worthy of the oldest house's trust, and preparing her for the inevitable challenges that lay ahead. The echoes of the former's warning of future threats lingered in her mind, a somber promise of the battles yet to be fought. Our timeline now jumps forward significantly, past the main events of Control and into the year 2019. It's here, in the immediate aftermath of her successful confrontation with the Hiss, that Jesse Faden, now firmly established as the director of the Federal Bureau of Control, receives a chilling, unexpected distress call. The FBC, you'll recall, is the secretive government agency tasked with containing and studying altered world events, or AWEs, which are incidents where the mundane reality of our world is drastically altered by supernatural forces. This particular alert originates from the investigation sector, a sprawling labyrinthine wing of the oldest house, the FBC's perpetually shifting, extra-dimensional headquarters. The message is urgent, indicating a newly reactivated AWE, one that had been previously contained but now shows disturbing signs of resurgence within the very walls of the FBC itself. This reactivated event is quickly identified as the Bright Falls AWE, a cataclysmic incident that occurred in the small Pacific Northwest town of Bright Falls years prior, in 2010. For those unfamiliar, the Bright Falls AWE involved a malevolent, dimension-hopping entity known as the Dark Presence, which exploited the creative power of a writer named Alan Wake, twisting his fiction into terrifying reality. The FBC had, for a time, successfully contained the aftermath of this event within the oldest house, sealing off the affected areas. But now, something has stirred. The distress signals are growing more frequent, more intense, suggesting that the containment is failing, or perhaps has already failed. Responding to the escalating crisis, Director Faden makes her way to the investigation sector. Upon arrival, she finds the entire sector in a state of emergency lockdown, its entrances sealed, its internal systems malfunctioning. The air within the sector is thick with an oppressive, almost palpable dread, a stark contrast to the usual, albeit strange atmosphere of the oldest house. The AWE's influence is undeniable, manifesting not just as physical disruption, but as an insidious psychological pressure that weighs heavily on anyone who dares to venture within. The FBC agents stationed there, those who hadn't already evacuated or succumbed, are barricaded, terrified, whispering of impossible shadows and shifting realities. As Jesse navigates the increasingly distorted corridors of the investigation sector, she begins to piece together the nature of the hostile entity at play. It isn't a conventional Hiss manifestation, though its effects are equally devastating. This entity presents itself as distorted light and shadow, flickering at the edges of perception, bending the very fabric of the environment. It is a presence that thrives on fear and confusion, twisting familiar architectural elements into nightmarish mockeries of their former selves. The entity's influence is pervasive, causing lights to flicker erratically, shadows to dance with malevolent intent, and the very structure of the oldest house to groan and shift in unsettling ways. This, Jesse soon realizes, is the return of the Dark Presence, an ancient cosmic horror that preys on creativity and fear, capable of infecting and corrupting both objects and living beings. Further into the corrupted sector, Jesse uncovers a disturbing truth. The Dark Presence has found a new, horrific conduit. She learns that Dr. Emil Hartman, a former psychiatrist from Bright Falls who had been involved in the original AWE and subsequently contained by the FBC, has been corrupted and transformed by the Dark Presence. Hartman, a man who once sought to exploit the Dark Presence for his own twisted research, has now become its unwilling, monstrous puppet. The entity has twisted his physical form, turning him into a grotesque, towering figure of shadow and light, a being barely recognizable as human, driven by the Dark Presence's insatiable hunger to escape the oldest house and spread its influence. Hartman, as a parapsychologist, possessed a unique understanding of the supernatural, making him a particularly potent and tragic vessel for the Dark Presence's malevolent will. His prior exposure to the Dark Presence in Bright Falls, where he had attempted to manipulate it for his own ends, had left him vulnerable, a lingering infection that the entity could now exploit. The FBC's attempts to contain Hartman, rather than curing him, had merely trapped the Dark Presence's influence within him, allowing it to fester and grow, awaiting an opportunity to fully manifest. As Jesse delves deeper into the investigation sector, she encounters the Dark Presence directly. It is not a being with a singular physical form, but rather an omnipresent oppressive force that permeates the environment. Its presence is chilling, manifesting as sudden drops in temperature, disorienting flashes of light, and an overwhelming sense of dread. The very air seems to thicken, and the sounds of the oldest house, usually a cacophony of strange hums and creaks, are replaced by an eerie, suffocating silence, punctuated by phantom whispers and the distant, distorted echoes of human screams. This direct exposure to the Dark Presence's reality-warping effects is profoundly disorienting, challenging Jesse's own perception of reality and testing her resolve. The entity plays on her fears, conjuring fleeting, terrifying illusions, attempting to break her will and make her another victim of its insidious influence. The experience serves as a stark reminder of the immense power of the Dark Presence, a force capable of not just altering reality, but of twisting the very minds of those who encounter it. Amidst the chaos and horror, Jessie begins to find crucial clues that link this Aidwee directly to the original Bright Falls incident. She discovers scattered pages of a manuscript, distinctively written, bearing the unmistakable style of Alan Wake. These are not just any pages, they are from his latest work, a novel titled Return. The unsettling revelation is that these manuscript pages are not merely narrative devices, they are actively influencing events within the oldest house. As Jessie collects these pages, she finds that the narrative within them directly correlates to the bizarre and dangerous phenomena unfolding around her. A description of a collapsing quarter in the manuscript might precede the very quarter she's in beginning to crumble. A mention of a hostile entity in the text could foreshadow its imminent appearance. This discovery underscores the profound, reality-bending nature of Alan Wake's writing, a power that the Dark Presence had exploited in Bright Falls, and is now, seemingly, attempting to exploit once more within the FBC's most secure facility. The manuscript pages are not just a record of events, but a blueprint for them, a terrifying testament to the power of a writer's words when imbued with the Dark Presence's influence. With this understanding, Jessie begins to grasp the true nature of the Dark Presence's current objective. It is not merely a random resurgence, it is a calculated attempt to escape its containment. The entity is attempting to use Dr. Hartman, now a grotesque puppet, as a conduit, a living gateway to break free from the oldest house. The investigation sector, with its unique properties and its proximity to contained AWEs, provides the perfect environment for the Dark Presence to amplify its power and manifest its escape plan. Hartman, already deeply corrupted and transformed, represents the ideal vessel, his weakened will and altered form making him susceptible to the entity's complete control. The Dark Presence's goal is clear: to leverage Hartman's remaining connection to the physical world and the inherent instability of the investigation sector to tear a hole in reality and unleash itself upon the wider world. This realization elevates the stakes of the AWE from a mere containment breach to a potential world-ending catastrophe. As Jessie continues her investigation, the puzzle pieces click into place, revealing the tragic fate of Alan Wake himself. She learns that Alan has been trapped in the Dark Place, an alternate, nightmarish dimension of pure darkness and distorted reality, ever since the original Bright Falls AW in 2010. This dark place is where the Dark Presence truly resides, and where it has held Alan captive for nearly a decade. But Alan, a writer of extraordinary talent and resilience, has not been idle. He has been actively trying to write his way out of this existential prison, using his creative power as a weapon against the oppressive darkness. His attempts, however, are not without consequence. Every word he writes, every narrative he crafts, has tangible, albeit often unpredictable, effects on reality. This leads to the profound understanding that Alan Wake's writings are not just influencing specific events, they are manifesting as new AWs within the oldest house. The very act of his struggle to escape the Dark Place, his desperate attempts to construct a narrative that will free him, is creating new threats and altering reality within the FBC's headquarters. These AWEs are not always direct manifestations of the manuscript pages Jessie finds. Sometimes they are more subtle, a ripple effect from Alan's ongoing battle against the Dark Presence. The oldest house, being a place where the boundaries of reality are already thin, is particularly susceptible to these narrative intrusions. These Ayus born from Alan's writing are not merely dangerous. They are unpredictable, reflecting the often chaotic and desperate nature of his creative process under extreme duress. They are echoes of his struggle, fragments of his stories bleeding into our reality, creating new challenges and dangers for the FBC. To navigate this increasingly surreal and dangerous landscape, Jessie discovers a crucial tool: the light switch. This isn't just any light switch, it's an object of power, an ordinary item imbued with extraordinary reality-altering capabilities by the Dark Presence. In the context of the investigation sector, the light switch allows Jessie to navigate between different realities, or as they are more accurately described, different drafts of Alan's story. With a flick of the switch, the environment around her can shift dramatically, transforming from one version of the investigation sector to another. One moment, she might be in a brightly lit, relatively stable corridor, and the next, she could find herself in a shadowy, dilapidated version of the same space, filled with new dangers and altered pathways. These drafts represent Alan's ongoing attempts to write his escape, each one a slightly different iteration of his narrative, each with its own set of challenges and opportunities. The light switch becomes Jessie's primary means of progression, allowing her to bypass obstacles, access hidden areas, and ultimately confront the source of the AWE. It is a powerful, yet dangerous tool, as each draft presents its own unique set of perils, reflecting the chaotic and unpredictable nature of Alan's desperate creative struggle. The ability to shift between these realities is not just a gameplay mechanic, it is a direct representation of the narrative instability caused by Alan's writing, a tangible manifestation of his struggle to control the story that will ultimately define his fate. As Jessie delves deeper into the investigation sector's altered reality, the very fabric of the oldest house seems to ripple with the influence of Bright Falls. She begins to encounter unsettling visions and echoes of Alan Wake himself. not as a physical presence, but as a spectral imprint woven into the environment. These manifestations take various forms. Distorted broadcasts flicker across abandoned television screens, their static-laced voices whispering fragments of Alan's internal monologue, his struggle with the dark place, and even cryptic warnings. His writings, too, begin to materialize, appearing as pages of manuscript scattered throughout the sector, their words subtly shifting the reality around them. These aren't just remnants, they are active communications, Alan's attempts to reach out across the dimensional divide, to guide or perhaps even manipulate events from within his prison. The Federal Bureau of Control's containment efforts, usually so robust and reliable, are severely challenged by this growing influence. The dark place, a dimension of pure darkness and malevolent thought forms, is not merely leaking into the oldest house, it is actively asserting its presence. The dark presence, the sentient, malevolent entity that embodies the dark place's will, gains strength with each passing moment, its tendrils extending further into the investigation sector. This increasing power is directly linked to Dr. Hartman, whose corrupted form acts as a conduit, a living anchor for the dark presence within the FBC's most secure facility. Jessie realizes with chilling clarity that her primary objective is no longer just investigation, but a desperate fight to contain the dark presence and prevent Dr. Hartman from fully escaping. Should Hartman break free of the oldest house, the implications are catastrophic. The dark presence would be unleashed upon the world, its reality-bending power and capacity for terror infecting global consciousness. Through her encounters with the dark presence's manifestations and her analysis of the FBC's archival research on Bright Falls, Jessie learns a crucial, terrifying truth. The dark presence feeds on fear and negative emotions. It thrives on despair, paranoia, and the deepest anxieties of sentient beings. Dr. Hartman, consumed by the entity, becomes a grotesque amplifier of this process. His own psychological torment, his inherent darkness, and his increasingly monstrous form radiate a palpable aura of terror, creating a fertile breeding ground for the dark presence within the oldest house. Every shadow, every unsettling sound, every moment of doubt Jessie experiences inadvertently fuels the entity she seeks to destroy. To combat this encroaching darkness, Jessie must utilize the full spectrum of her director abilities. Her telekinetic powers become indispensable, allowing her to hurl debris, create shields, and manipulate the environment to her advantage against the dark presence's physical manifestations. The service weapon, a paratiliterian firearm that transforms to suit the director's will, is her primary offensive tool. Its various forms, shatter, spin, pierce, charge, and grip, proving effective against the shadowy entities and the corrupted environments. She also employs her launch ability to propel objects with immense force, and her shield to deflect incoming attacks. The FBC's standard weaponry, though powerful, proves largely ineffectual against the dark presence's more ethereal forms, underscoring the unique nature of this threat. Jessie's evade and levitate abilities provide crucial mobility, allowing her to navigate the increasingly hostile and distorted landscape of the investigation sector. During these harrowing encounters, a profound and unsettling realization dawns on Jessie. The strange reality-altering phenomena she's experiencing, the sudden appearance of pathways, the subtle shifts in the environment that sometimes aid her, aren't random. She discovers that Alan Wake, from within the dark place, is intentionally writing events into existence within the oldest house to aid her. He is manipulating the very fabric of reality, using his narrative power to create opportunities, reveal information, or even manifest helpful objects. However, this assistance comes with unpredictable side effects. Alan's writing is not precise. It's born of desperation and the chaotic influence of the dark place. His attempts to help can inadvertently create new dangers, distort existing realities in unforeseen ways, or even strengthen the dark presence in its attempts to subvert his narratives. This symbiotic, yet volatile relationship between Alan's creative power and the oldest house's inherent malleability adds another layer of complexity to Jessie's mission. She is not merely fighting an entity, she is navigating a story being written in real time, with herself as a reluctant, yet central character. The climax of this struggle arrives as Jessie confronts the corrupted Dr. Hartman. He is no longer the man he once was, nor even the monster she initially encountered. The dark presence has fully assimilated him, transforming him into a powerful, hiss-like entity, a grotesque amalgamation of human form and shadowy, malevolent energy. Hartman now projects immense psychological terror, his presence alone capable of inducing debilitating fear in those around him. His attacks are not merely physical, they are psychological assaults, attempting to break Jessie's will and feed the dark presence with her despair. The battle is a brutal test of Jessie's resolve and her mastery of her abilities. The environment itself becomes a weapon, twisted and reshaped by Hartman's presence, forcing Jessie to adapt and improvise. She must not only damage his physical form, but also resist the psychological onslaught, maintaining her focus and determination against an enemy that feeds on her very fear. Through a combination of overwhelming force from the service weapon, precise use of her telekinetic abilities, and unwavering mental fortitude, Jessie manages to defeat Dr. Hartman. The battle culminates in a decisive blow that severs the dark presence's primary anchor within the oldest house. As Hartman's corrupted form dissipates, the intense pressure of the dark presence within the investigation sector recedes, though a lingering sense of unease remains. This victory is not an eradication of the dark presence, but a crucial containment. Without Hartman as its conduit, the entity's direct influence within the FBC's headquarters is significantly diminished, preventing a catastrophic outbreak. In the immediate aftermath of Hartman's defeat, a profound and direct, albeit brief, communication occurs. Jesse experiences a clear, undistorted message from Alan Wake. It is not a vision or an echo, but a direct mental link, a voice speaking clearly in her mind. Alan confirms his continued struggle within the dark place, his voice imbued with a weariness born of endless battle, but also a flicker of hope. He acknowledges her actions, expressing a desperate gratitude for her intervention, and revealing his awareness of her as a key player in his ongoing narrative. This communication solidifies Jesse's understanding. Alan is not merely a victim. He is an active participant, a writer trapped in his own story, desperately trying to rewrite his escape and reshape the narrative of the dark place. This moment is a powerful confirmation of the interconnectedness of their realities and the shared threat they face. With Dr. Hartman neutralized and the dark presence's immediate threat contained, the Bright Falls AWE is recontained. The investigation sector, while still bearing scars of the conflict, begins to stabilize. The FBC can once again exert its full control over the area, reinforcing containment protocols and studying the new data gleaned from Jesse's encounters. However, the experience leaves an indelible mark on Jesse and the Bureau. The threat of the dark place and Alan Wake's influence is far from over. It remains an ongoing existential concern for the FBC. Jesse understands that this was merely a skirmish, a prelude to a larger conflict. The implications of Alan Wake's direct communication and his ability to manipulate reality from within the dark place are profound. Jesse realizes that the FBC must now actively monitor for further manifestations of Alan Wake's writings and the dark presence. This is not a passive watch. It requires a proactive approach, anticipating Alan's attempts to influence their world, discerning his intentions, and preparing for the unpredictable side effects of his narrative interventions. The Bureau's mission has expanded. They are not just containing altered world events, but actively engaging with a living story, a narrative being written by a desperate author trapped in a dimension of pure nightmare. The lines between fiction and reality have blurred, and the FBC, under Director Faden, must now navigate this new, terrifying landscape. The future of reality itself may depend on their ability to understand and respond to the unfolding narrative of Alan Wake. Following the relative quiet of the intervening years, the year 2023 marks a cataclysmic return to the nightmare, as the events of Alan Wake too could plunge us back into the heart of the supernatural. This latest chapter begins with a chilling discovery in the Pacific Northwest, drawing the attention of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. FBI agent Saga Anderson, a highly skilled profiler with an uncanny intuition, is dispatched to the seemingly idyllic town of Bright Falls, Washington, to investigate a series of gruesome, ritualistic murders. These aren't just ordinary homicides. The victims bear the hallmarks of something ancient and malevolent, their hearts carved out, their bodies arranged in disturbing patterns that speak of dark ceremonies rather than human malice. Saga, accompanied by her partner, the stoic and world-weary FBI agent Alex Casey, arrives in Bright Falls to lead the investigation. Their immediate focus is the murder of fellow FBI agent Robert Nightingale, whose mutilated corpse is found near Cauldron Lake. This isn't the first time Nightingale has crossed paths with the supernatural. He was a key figure in the original Bright Falls incident, having been sent to investigate Alan Wake's disappearance years prior. His death now serves as a grim harbinger, signaling that the darkness Alan Wake once fought has not only returned but has grown exponentially more powerful and brazen. As Saga and Casey begin their initial inquiries, the oppressive atmosphere of Bright Falls immediately begins to weigh on them, a subtle dread that permeates the mist-shrouded forests and the quiet, almost too friendly demeanor of the locals. Almost immediately upon her arrival, Saga begins to experience unsettling visions and premonitions. These aren't mere flashes of insight, they are vivid, disorienting glimpses into events yet to unfold, or perhaps events that are unfolding in a reality parallel to her own. She sees strange symbols, hears whispers that seem to emanate from the very air, and feels an inexplicable pull towards certain locations, as if the town itself is trying to communicate with her. These experiences are deeply unnerving for Saga, a woman who prides herself on logic and empirical evidence. They hint at a profound, almost faded connection she has to Bright Falls and the supernatural forces at play within it. A connection that will unravel throughout the investigation and reveal truths about her own past that she never suspected. This burgeoning psychic sensitivity is a direct consequence of her heritage, though she is unaware of it at this stage, a latent ability awakened by the sheer proximity to the Dark Place's influence. Meanwhile, trapped within the nightmarish dimension known as the Dark Place, Alan Wake has been engaged in a desperate, decade-long struggle for survival and escape. He has endured countless cycles of torment and false dawns, his mind a battleground against the encroaching madness. His only hope, his only weapon, is his ability as a writer. He believes that by crafting a new story, one sufficiently powerful and intricate, he can rewrite his reality and finally break free. This new manuscript, which he titles Return, becomes his singular obsession, a beacon in the oppressive darkness. He writes tirelessly, fueled by a desperate hope, but also by the constant fear that he is merely deepening his own prison. Alan's attempts to write his way out are relentlessly sabotaged and twisted by the Dark Presence, an ancient, malevolent entity that feeds on fear and creativity. The Dark Presence has manifested a particularly insidious form, Scratch. Scratch is a dark doppelganger of Alan, a corrupted reflection born from the fear and negativity Alan experienced during his initial encounter with the Dark Presence. Scratch embodies Alan's worst impulses, his failures, and his despair. He actively torments Alan, appearing as a menacing, grinning figure who mocks Alan's efforts, rewrites his manuscript pages with grotesque alterations, and constantly reminds him of his past failures, particularly his inability to save his wife, Alice. This psychological warfare is designed to break Alan's spirit, to make him succumb to the Dark Presence entirely and become a permanent vessel for its will. Alan's existence in the Dark Place is a continuous loop of writing, revising, and fighting against Scratch's corruptions, a Sisyphean task that pushes him to the brink of sanity. He experiences the same events repeatedly, a Groundhog Day of horror, each iteration subtly different, each offering a sliver of hope only to snatch it away. Amidst this torment, Alan is not entirely alone. He encounters various manifestations within the Dark Place, figures who seem to offer guidance, albeit in cryptic and often unsettling ways. The most prominent of these is Thomas Zane, the poet who preceded Alan into the Dark Place and who, in his own time, used his art to combat the entity. Zane appears to Alan in various forms, sometimes as a diver, sometimes as an ethereal presence, offering fragments of advice, nudging Alan towards certain narrative choices, and emphasizing the power of art to shape reality. Zane, however, is not a straightforward ally. His motives are complex, and his own identity has been fractured by his time in the Dark Place. Alan also encounters other distorted figures, echoes of people from his past, or perhaps manifestations of his own subconscious, all contributing to the labyrinthine narrative he is attempting to construct. These encounters serve to guide Alan, however indirectly, towards the understanding that his story must not merely be an escape, but a weapon, a means to fundamentally alter the nature of the Dark Place itself and, by extension, reality. He learns that the Dark Place is not just a prison, but a canvas, and his words are the brushstrokes that can either doom him or set him free. Back in Bright Falls, Saga's investigation into the ritualistic murders leads her to a chilling discovery: the existence of the Cult of the Tree. This secretive organization, operating in the shadows of the Pacific Northwest, is not merely a group of deranged killers. They are adherents to a dark ideology, actively performing these ritualistic murders as offerings. Their purpose is to empower the Dark Presence, which they perceive not as a malevolent entity, but as a divine force, a bringer of change and a source of true power. The cultists believe that by sacrificing individuals in specific arcane ways, they can strengthen the Dark Presence's grip on reality, allowing it to fully manifest and reshape the world according to their twisted vision. Saga uncovers their hidden altars, their disturbing symbols, and the remnants of their gruesome ceremonies, piecing together a horrifying picture of a deeply entrenched evil that has been festering in Bright Falls for years, perhaps even decades, largely unnoticed by the outside world. The cult's victims are carefully chosen, often individuals with some connection to the supernatural events of the past, or those whose fear can be most effectively harvested. As Saga delves deeper into the mysteries of Bright Falls and Alan struggles to complete his manuscript in the Dark Place, the realities begin to intertwine in increasingly profound and unsettling ways. The boundary between the two dimensions becomes porous, allowing influences to bleed through. This interweaving is not merely metaphorical, it manifests as tangible, undeniable evidence. Saga starts to find pages from Alan's manuscript, scattered throughout Bright Falls. These aren't just random writings, they are pages from Return, Alan's desperate attempt to write his way out. What makes these pages truly terrifying is their prophetic accuracy. They describe events that have either just happened, are currently happening, or are about to happen, often in chilling detail. Saga reads descriptions of her own actions, her conversations, and even her internal thoughts, all written by a man she has never met, trapped in a dimension she doesn't yet fully comprehend. This discovery shatters her rational worldview, forcing her to confront the impossible and accept that the fabric of reality is far more malleable and interconnected than she ever imagined. The manuscript pages become both a guide and a torment, offering clues but also hinting at a predetermined fate that Saga struggles to resist. The Dark Presence, now understood more fully as the Dark Place itself, is not merely a localized threat anymore, it is growing stronger, its tendrils reaching further, threatening to consume all of reality. Its influence is no longer confined to Cauldron Lake or the immediate vicinity of Bright Falls. The subtle shifts in reality, the increasing frequency of supernatural occurrences, and the growing despair amongst the townspeople are all symptoms of its expanding power. The Dark Place feeds on fear, on negativity, on creative energy, and has been feasting for years, slowly but surely accumulating enough power to break through the dimensional barriers. The ritualistic murders by the Cult of the Tree are actively accelerating this process, providing concentrated bursts of negative energy that empower the entity. The very air in Bright Falls feels heavier, the shadows deeper, and the sense of impending doom palpable. The dark place is no longer content to merely imprison, it seeks to conquer. Through Scratch, its most potent manifestation, the Dark Presence actively manipulates events in both Bright Falls and the Dark Place. Scratch is not just a psychological tormentor, he is an agent of chaos, a puppet master pulling strings in both dimensions. In the Dark Place, he constantly rewrites Alan's manuscript pages, twisting his narrative intentions, introducing new horrors, and creating obstacles designed to keep Alan trapped and despairing. He makes Alan's efforts to escape seem futile, ensuring that every victory is fleeting, every hope dashed. In Bright Falls, Scratch's influence is more insidious. He possesses individuals, turning them into violent, irrational agents of the Dark Presence. He orchestrates events to sow discord, to spread fear, and to facilitate the cult of the tree's gruesome rituals. He is the unseen hand behind many of the tragedies and horrors that Saga encounters, a malevolent intelligence subtly guiding the unfolding nightmare, all with the ultimate goal of ensuring the Dark Place's triumph and Alan Wake's complete subjugation. As Saga delves deeper, the manuscript pages lead her to a crucial discovery: the existence of the clicker. This seemingly innocuous device, a simple flashlight, is far more than it appears. It is a powerful artifact, a literal plot device capable of altering reality. The clicker is intrinsically linked to Alan Wake, a tool he possessed during his initial encounter with the Dark Presence. Saga learns that the clicker was not merely a light source, but a focal point for Alan's creative power, a device that could be used to banish the darkness, or, if wielded improperly, to amplify its power. The understanding of the clicker's true nature is a game changer, providing Saga with a potential weapon against the encroaching darkness. It represents a tangible link between Alan's creative reality-bending abilities and the physical world, a device that can literally rewrite the rules of existence. Her discovery of its significance marks a turning point in her investigation, shifting her focus from merely solving murders to understanding and combating a cosmic threat. During her investigation, Saga encounters the Taken, individuals corrupted and controlled by the Dark Presence. These are not mere zombies or mindless monsters. They are people who have been overwhelmed by the darkness, their minds twisted, their bodies imbued with supernatural strength and aggression. They retain echoes of their former selves, making them all the more terrifying, as Saga often recognizes faces from the community, now horrifyingly distorted. The Taken are the Dark Presence's foot soldiers, its physical manifestation in the real world, and they pose a significant threat to Saga and Casey. They appear in waves, emerging from the shadows, their eyes glowing with an eerie light, their movements unnatural and violent. Fighting them requires not just firepower, but also light, as the Dark Presence is vulnerable to concentrated illumination. These encounters are brutal and frequent, forcing Saga to hone her combat skills and to confront the grim reality of what the Dark Presence is capable of. Each Taken represents a lost soul, a victim of the encroaching darkness, and their presence underscores the urgency of Saga's mission. As the situation in Bright Falls spirals further out of control, with the Taken becoming more prevalent and the cult's activities intensifying, Saga and Casey find themselves in desperate need of assistance. They seek help from the local sheriff's department, hoping for backup and resources. This leads them to Sheriff Tim Breaker, the current law enforcement officer in charge of Bright Falls. However, Breaker is not the typical small-town sheriff. He is a man haunted by his own experiences with the supernatural, particularly his involvement in the original Bright Falls incident. He is a man who has seen too much and who carries the weight of past failures. His initial demeanor is one of weariness and skepticism, as he has witnessed firsthand how quickly rational explanations crumble in the face of the inexplicable. Despite his jaded exterior, Breaker possesses a deep, if reluctant, understanding of the forces at play in Bright Falls. He becomes an unexpected, if sometimes exasperated, ally, providing local knowledge, resources, and a crucial link to the town's supernatural history. His presence grounds the increasingly fantastical events in a sense of local reality, even as that reality is being torn apart by the Dark Place. His past encounters, particularly with the enigmatic Federal Bureau of Control, hint at a larger, more complex tapestry of supernatural occurrences that extend far beyond Bright Falls itself. Saga Anderson, a seasoned FBI agent with a preternatural knack for profiling, arrived in Bright Falls in 2023, initially dispatched to investigate a series of ritualistic murders. Her investigation quickly plunged her into the town's dark history, a history inextricably linked to the disappearance of writer Alan Wake 13 years prior. She began to uncover the chilling details of the Cauldron Lake incident of 2010, the very event that had trapped Wake in a dimensional prison known as the Dark Place. The local sheriff, Tim Breaker, a man with his own unsettling encounters with the supernatural, provided cryptic clues, hinting at a reality far stranger than any crime scene Saga had ever processed. As Saga delved deeper, the lines between her investigation and her own past began to blur, revealing a profound and unsettling truth. Her family history was deeply intertwined with Bright Falls and its supernatural undercurrents. The town, it seemed, was a nexus of paratiliterian activity, a place where the veil between dimensions was thin, and the extraordinary was commonplace. Saga's lineage, she discovered, was not merely connected to Bright Falls. It was a fundamental thread in its very fabric. Her grandmother, a woman named Cynthia Weaver, had been a key figure in the town's esoteric past, a keeper of secrets and a guardian against the encroaching darkness. This revelation was not a gradual dawning, but a series of jarring insights, triggered by encounters with the town's eccentric residents and the increasingly surreal events unfolding around her. Each clue, each whispered legend, painted a picture of a family legacy steeped in the supernatural, a legacy that now demanded her active participation. Central to this unfolding drama were the Old Gods of Asgard, a legendary local rock band whose psychedelic folk tunes held an uncanny power. These aging rockers, Tor and Odin Anderson, were not merely quirky musicians. They were in fact powerful proletarians, their music acting as a conduit for altering reality. Their songs, imbued with an ancient primal energy, played a crucial role in the fight against the encroaching darkness, their lyrics often prophesying or even influencing the events around them. They were the keepers of old ways, the guardians of a knowledge almost forgotten, their instruments not just for entertainment but for protection. Their music was a shield, a weapon, and a beacon in the encroaching gloom, capable of repelling the Taken, the shadowy entities corrupted by the dark presence. The true shock, however, came with a revelation of their familial connection to Saga. Tor and Odin Anderson were not just allies, they were her grandfather and great-uncle, respectively. This stunning discovery cemented Saga's place within the narrative, transforming her from an outside investigator into an integral part of Brightfall's supernatural tapestry. The realization brought with it a cascade of memories, half-forgotten stories from her childhood, now recontextualized with a terrifying clarity. The whimsical tales of her youth, once dismissed as eccentric family lore, now held profound, literal meaning. It explained her innate ability to perceive and interpret the strange occurrences, her seemingly inexplicable intuition. She was not merely observing the supernatural, she was a part of it, a descendant of those who had always stood on the front lines against the encroaching shadow. As Saga navigated this increasingly bizarre landscape, she relied heavily on her unique cognitive ability, what she termed her mind place. This mental construct, a personalized, hyper-organized space within her own mind, allowed her to process and connect disparate clues with remarkable efficiency. Within her mind place, a literal manifestation of her deductive reasoning, she could arrange evidence, interview profiles of suspects and victims, and reconstruct timelines. It was a sanctuary of logic in a world spiraling into illogic, a place where she could sift through the supernatural noise and deduce the true nature of the threat. It was here that she pieced together the fragments of information, connecting the ritualistic murders to the dark presence, understanding its insidious influence on the town, and ultimately deducing its ultimate goal, to escape the dark place and manifest fully in the waking world. Meanwhile, trapped within the shifting, nightmarish landscape of the dark place, Alan Wake was desperately attempting to write his way out. He was creating a new manuscript, Return, a story he hoped would provide a definitive ending to his torment. However, the dark place was a treacherous realm, its very nature parasitic. It twisted his intentions, corrupting his words and turning his narrative against him. Crucially, the scenes Alan wrote in the dark place directly manifested in Saga's reality, blurring the lines between fiction and fact, between the written word and tangible experience. A character he described might suddenly appear, a location he penned into existence would materialize, a plot point he crafted would unfold with terrifying precision. This direct causal link between Alan's creative output and Saga's lived experience was the engine of the unfolding horror, a constant reminder of the dark place's manipulative power. This insidious manipulation was further amplified by the presence of Scratch, a malevolent entity, a dark doppelganger of Alan Wake himself. Scratch, a manifestation of the dark presence's corruption of Alan, had possessed Alan's body and was now actively attempting to complete the Return manuscript to his own dark ends. Unlike Alan, who sought to break the loop and escape, Scratch aimed to solidify the dark presence's hold on reality, to make the nightmare permanent. He twisted Alan's words, perverted his intentions, and used the manuscript as a weapon, crafting a narrative that would allow the dark presence to fully consume Bright Falls and beyond. His actions were not random. They were a calculated, malevolent rewrite of reality, designed to usher in an era of perpetual darkness. Saga's journey culminated in a harrowing confrontation with Scratch. It was during this terrifying encounter that she fully realized the true nature of the entity possessing Alan's body. Scratch was not merely Alan under duress. He was a dark doppelganger, a corrupted reflection, empowered by the dark place itself. He was the embodiment of Alan's fears, his self-doubt, and the insidious influence of the dark presence given malevolent form. This realization was a pivotal moment for Saga, allowing her to understand that she wasn't fighting Alan, but a separate, distinct entity that had usurped his identity. It clarified her mission, not to save Alan from himself, but to save Alan from Scratch. The fight was not against a man, but against a parasitic entity that wore his face. To combat this existential threat, Saga and her partner, Alex Casey, embarked on a perilous quest to retrieve the clicker. This seemingly innocuous household item, a simple light switch, was in fact a key item for controlling the narrative. It was a paratiliterian object, imbued with the power to alter reality, to click between different outcomes. The clicker, a relic from Alan's past, represented a tangible means of influencing the story, a physical manifestation of narrative control. Its retrieval was not merely a plot point, it was a symbolic act, a reclaiming of agency in a world where reality was being rewritten against their will. It was during these escalating events that Saga gained a profound understanding of her own inherent abilities. She learned that she was a para-utilitarian, possessing abilities to perceive and influence the supernatural. This understanding wasn't just intellectual, it was a visceral awakening, a recognition of powers that had lain dormant within her. Her mind place, her uncanny intuition, her ability to see connections others missed. These were not just skills, they were manifestations of her para-utilitarian nature. She could sense the echoes of past events, perceive the subtle shifts in reality, and, as she would soon discover, actively participate in shaping the narrative itself. This revelation transformed her from an investigator into an active player, a wielder of supernatural influence. With the clicker in hand and her own para-utilitarian abilities awakened, Saga and Alan began to work together, across realities, to rewrite the ending of Return. Alan, trapped in the dark place, continued to write, but now with Saga's insights and influence guiding his hand. Saga, in the waking world, used her understanding of the narrative and her own abilities to steer events, to provide Alan with the necessary inspiration and direction. Their collaboration was a delicate dance between two worlds, a symbiotic relationship where one's actions directly impacted the other's reality. Alan would write a scene, and Saga would experience its manifestation, providing feedback and input that Alan would then incorporate into his next iteration. This iterative process, a constant feedback loop between writer and protagonist, was their only hope. Saga, now fully aware of her power, began to use the clicker to alter the narrative and weaken Scratch's influence. Each click of the device was a subtle shift in reality, a small but significant alteration to the story Scratch was trying to impose. A seemingly insurmountable obstacle might suddenly become navigable. A crucial piece of information might appear where it was previously absent. An enemy's power might inexplicably wane. The clicker became her direct interface with the narrative, allowing her to subtly nudge the plot in their favor, to unravel the threads of Scratch's malevolent story. It was a tool of narrative subversion, a way to reclaim control from the dark presence's grip. Ultimately, the combined efforts of Saga and Alan aimed to break the loop and escape the dark place permanently. Their goal was not just to survive, but to end the cycle of torment that had plagued Alan for over a decade. By rewriting Return with a definitive, positive ending, they sought to sever the dark presence's connection to Alan, to free him from its influence, and to restore the balance between realities. This was the culmination of their intertwined destinies, a final, desperate struggle for narrative control, a fight to ensure that the story ended not in darkness, but in a true and lasting return. The events of Alan Wake 2, a desperate struggle against the encroaching darkness, brought the Federal Bureau of Control to a new precipice. Now, as we move into the ongoing era, the future of the FBC and the Dark Place remains uncertain, a perpetual conflict with no clear end in sight. The Bureau, having faced its most profound challenges yet, continues its tireless work of monitoring and containing altered world events, or AWEs, those inexplicable phenomena that defy conventional understanding. However, the events in Bright Falls, the escalating incursions of the Dark Place, have instilled a heightened awareness within the FBC. They now understand that the threats are not merely isolated incidents, but interconnected manifestations of a larger, more insidious force. The Dark Place, a dimension of primordial darkness and corrupted thought, is no longer a theoretical construct for most agents, but a tangible, existential threat that demands constant vigilance. At the heart of this ongoing struggle is Jessie Faden, the director of the FBC. She remains at the helm, her unique connection to the oldest house, the Bureau's headquarters, and a para-utilitarian object of immense power, making her indispensable. Jessie faces an array of new threats, each demanding her unique blend of leadership, combat prowess, and psionic abilities. Her understanding of the interconnectedness of realities has deepened significantly since her initial appointment. She now grasps the subtle threads that link the mundane world to the various dimensions and planes of existence, including the astral plane and, most disturbingly, the Dark Place. This heightened awareness, born from her own experiences and the myriad documents she has absorbed, allows her to anticipate and respond to threats in ways no previous director could. She understands that the boundaries between these realities are not as rigid as once believed, and that incursions from one into another are not only possible, but increasingly frequent. Meanwhile, Alan Wake's struggle against the Dark Place continues, an eternal battle waged both within and outside the confines of the supernatural dimension. His artistic endeavors, his writing, are not merely stories but conduits, tools that can both manifest and combat the darkness. The potential for further manifestations of the Dark Place, fueled by his creative output and the inherent power of the reality-bending lake in Bright Falls, remains a constant concern for the FBC. They understand that Wake's narrative, his very existence, is intrinsically linked to the Dark Place's ability to bleed into reality. The Bureau's efforts to understand and, if possible, control this phenomenon are ongoing, a delicate dance between containment and the recognition that Wake himself is a para-utilitarian object of immense, unpredictable power. His literary creations, once mere fiction, now hold the potential to reshape reality itself, a terrifying prospect that keeps the FBC on high alert. This intricate dance between fiction and reality has become increasingly blurred, posing existential threats that challenge the very fabric of existence. The FBC has long dealt with objects and events that defied logic, but the events surrounding Alan Wake have introduced a new paradigm. What is written can become real, what is imagined can manifest, and the subjective experiences of individuals can warp objective reality. This blurring of lines creates a profound philosophical crisis for the Bureau, forcing them to reevaluate their understanding of causality, agency, and the very nature of truth. The implications are far-reaching, affecting not only their containment protocols, but also their understanding of human consciousness and its potential to influence the world around it. The FBC's top scientists and parapsychologists are grappling with these concepts, attempting to formulate new theories and frameworks to comprehend this unprecedented level of reality manipulation. The oldest house, a shifting labyrinthine structure that defies conventional architecture, remains the central hub for FBC operations. It is a paratiliterian object in its own right, constantly adapting to new threats and anomalies, its internal geography shifting to accommodate the Bureau's evolving needs. Its unique properties, its ability to contain and channel supernatural energies, make it an indispensable fortress in the ongoing conflict. New sectors emerge and recede, new containment cells are constructed, and new pathways open and close, all in response to the dynamic nature of the threats the FBC faces. The house itself is a living entity, a sentient guardian that works in conjunction with the director. Its immense power, a double-edged sword that requires constant vigilance and understanding. Its sheer scale and complexity reflect the ever-growing scope of the FBC's mission, a testament to the unending parade of the inexplicable that demands their attention. The FBC's research into the nature of altered world events, or AWEs, expands exponentially in this ongoing era. They are no longer content with merely containing these phenomena. They seek to understand their origins, their underlying mechanisms, and their connections to other dimensions and entities. This expanded research involves a multidisciplinary approach, drawing upon the expertise of physicists, parapsychologists, linguists, and even historians. They delve into ancient myths, forgotten folklore, and esoteric texts, searching for patterns and clues that might shed light on the true nature of these reality-bending occurrences. The ultimate goal is not just containment, but a comprehensive understanding that could potentially lead to prevention or even manipulation of AWs for the benefit of humanity. This deeper understanding is crucial for anticipating future threats and developing more effective countermeasures against the increasingly sophisticated manifestations of the unknown. Jesse Faden's personal connection to the board, the enigmatic entity that guides the FBC from the astral plane and the astral plane itself, deepens significantly. This connection, forged during her initial journey to become director, continues to evolve, influencing her decisions and augmenting her abilities. The board, a collection of geometric shapes and voices, communicates with her directly, offering cryptic advice and sometimes demanding specific actions. Her ability to traverse the astral plane, a dimension of thought and pure energy, allows her to gain unique perspectives and insights that are unavailable to other agents. This deepening connection grants her access to new psionic powers, further enhancing her combat capabilities and her ability to manipulate the environment. However, this power comes with a cost, a constant mental strain, and the ever-present risk of being overwhelmed by the board's often unfathomable will. Her decisions are now not just her own, but often a collaboration with this ancient, powerful entity, a partnership that is both empowering and unsettling. Despite the containment efforts, the Hiss, the resonant, hostile entity that once invaded the oldest house, still poses a latent threat. Though largely suppressed and confined to specific areas, its insidious influence remains, a constant hum beneath the surface of the Bureau's operations. The Hiss, a sentient, extra-dimensional force that seeks to corrupt and assimilate, requires constant vigilance. FBC agents are trained to recognize its subtle manifestations, its whispering temptations, and its lingering resonance. Containment protocols are rigorously enforced, and specialized teams are dedicated to monitoring Hiss-affected zones, ensuring that no new outbreaks occur. The memory of the Hiss invasion, the widespread corruption, and the horrific transformations it wrought serves as a stark reminder of the ever-present danger, a constant pressure on the FBC to maintain its guard. The Bureau understands that the Hiss is not truly defeated, merely contained, and that a lapse in vigilance could lead to another catastrophic outbreak. Dr. Casper Darling's research and recordings continue to provide crucial, albeit cryptic, insights into the FBC's history and the nature of reality. His extensive video logs, audio recordings, and scientific papers scattered throughout the oldest house offer a window into the mind of a brilliant but eccentric scientist who delved deeper into the mysteries of the supernatural than almost anyone else. Darling's theories on paratiliterian objects, the astral plane, and the very fabric of existence are invaluable resources for the FBC's ongoing research. His often humorous but deeply profound observations help agents understand the bizarre phenomena they encounter, providing context and theoretical frameworks for the inexplicable. Despite his disappearance, his intellectual legacy continues to shape the Bureau's understanding of the universe, his voice a persistent echo in the halls of the oldest house, guiding and challenging those who follow in his footsteps. His insights are particularly vital in understanding the interplay between human consciousness and the manifestation of supernatural phenomena. The Bureau's understanding of paratiliterian objects, those everyday items imbued with supernatural power and their potential for both good and harm, evolves considerably. They are no longer just artifacts to be contained, they are tools, weapons, and sometimes even allies. The FBC develops more sophisticated methods for identifying, analyzing, and even utilizing these objects. Training regimens for agents now include extensive instruction on interacting with paratiliterian objects, understanding their inherent properties, and mitigating their risks. The service weapon, Jesse Faden's shapeshifting firearm, is the prime example of a paratiliterian object wielded for good, but countless others exist, each with its own unique abilities and dangers. The Bureau's research delves into the origins of these objects, seeking to understand how mundane items become imbued with such extraordinary power, and whether this process can be replicated or controlled. This evolving understanding allows the FBC to become more proactive in its approach to the supernatural, moving beyond mere containment to a more nuanced engagement with the forces at play. Finally, new FBC agents are constantly recruited and rigorously trained, facing the daunting task of understanding and containing the unknown. The influx of new talent is essential for maintaining the Bureau's operational capacity in the face of ever-increasing threats. These recruits, often individuals with latent psionic abilities or natural affinity for the inexplicable, undergo an intense training program within the oldest house. They learn about the various types of AWEs, the history of the FBC, the dangers of the Hiss, and the proper protocols for containment and combat. They are exposed to the bewildering realities of the supernatural, forced to confront their preconceived notions of the world and embrace a new, more complex understanding of existence. The training is not merely physical, it is a mental and philosophical reorientation, preparing them for a life of constant vigilance and the perpetual battle against the forces that seek to unravel reality. These new agents represent the future of the FBC, the next generation of defenders against the encroaching darkness. Their success or failure will determine the fate of not just the Bureau, but potentially all of reality. This ongoing recruitment and training program is a testament to the FBC's commitment to its mission, a recognition that the fight against the unknown is a never-ending one, requiring a constant influx of dedicated individuals willing to face the impossible. The Bureau's training methods also adapt to the new threats, incorporating lessons learned from the Hiss invasion and the escalating incidents related to the Dark Place. They are taught to be resourceful, adaptable, and to trust their instincts, for in the world of the FBC, logic often takes a backseat to intuition. The psychological toll of the job is also a significant consideration, with agents receiving support and counseling to cope with the profound and often disturbing nature of their work. The FBC understands that its agents are its greatest asset, and their well-being is paramount in the ongoing struggle against the forces that defy explanation. The new agents are not just soldiers, they are scholars, investigators, and ultimately guardians of reality. Their journey into the heart of the unknown is just beginning, a testament to the enduring mystery and danger that defines the world of the Federal Bureau of Control. The FBC, ever the clandestine organization, finds its relationship with external governments and other powerful organizations becoming increasingly complex. While their mandate demands secrecy, the sheer scale of supernatural phenomena, particularly after events like the AWE in Bright Falls, necessitates resources beyond what their internal budget can always provide. This delicate balancing act involves carefully curated disclosures, strategic partnerships with intelligence agencies that are themselves only partially informed, and the constant threat of exposure. They must navigate a world that simultaneously fears and dismisses the unknown, constantly weighing the benefits of limited cooperation against the existential risk of revealing the true nature of reality. The FBC's internal politics, always a labyrinth of competing factions and ideological differences, are further complicated by these external pressures. Some within the Bureau advocate for a more open approach, believing that greater transparency could lead to crucial support, while others cling fiercely to the old ways, convinced that any breach of secrecy would invite chaos. Director Faden, still relatively new to her role, finds herself at the epicenter of these debates, her decisions shaping the future trajectory of the entire organization. Meanwhile, Alan Wake's writings, both his past works like The Sudden Stop and his ongoing struggle within the Dark Place to craft a return, continue to act as potent conduits for the Dark Place's influence. His words, infused with the archetypal power of the Dark Presence, possess a terrifying ability to manifest into reality, shaping events and bending the fabric of existence. The FBC has established dedicated teams, often comprising linguists, literary analysts, and parapsychologists, to meticulously track and analyze any new material attributed to Wake. They understand that even a seemingly innocuous phrase or a fleeting mention in an obscure publication could be a harbinger of a new AWE, a subtle nudge from the Dark Place designed to erode the boundaries between worlds. The inherent paradox of Wake's situation, his attempts to write himself free inadvertently strengthening the very entity that holds him captive, is a constant source of frustration and fear for the Bureau. They grapple with the ethical dilemma of potentially suppressing his works, knowing that such actions could further destabilize the delicate balance. The concept of thresholds, points where realities intersect and bleed into one another, has become a key area of FBC investigation. These aren't just isolated AWEs, but rather persistent, often subtle, breaches in the dimensional membrane where the mundane and the supernatural are in constant dangerous contact. The oldest house itself, with its shifting architecture and interdimensional properties, is considered a massive living threshold. But the FBC is discovering smaller, more localized thresholds all over the globe, often tied to places of intense human emotion, historical significance, or geological anomalies. These thresholds are not always immediately dangerous, but they act as weak points, potential entryways for the dark place, or even other unknown entities. Research into thresholds involves advanced spatial analysis, resonant frequency mapping, and the deployment of specialized FBC agents trained to identify and, if possible, stabilize these fragile interdimensional seams. The ultimate goal is to understand the underlying mechanics of these intersections, hoping to predict and prevent future incursions. Jessie Faden, despite her growing experience and the immense power she wields as director, continues to grapple with the profound ethical implications of the FBC's power and its impact on the world. The Bureau operates outside conventional legal frameworks, making life-altering decisions about individuals, entire communities, and even the nature of reality itself, often without public oversight or accountability. Jessie, with her personal history of supernatural trauma and her unique connection to Polaris, possesses a heightened sensitivity to suffering and a strong moral compass. She constantly questions the FBC's methods, its often cold and clinical approach to the anomalous, and the long-term consequences of its interventions. The containment of altered items, the suppression of information, the occasional necessary sacrifices, these weigh heavily on her conscience. She seeks to balance the FBC's crucial protective mandate with a more humane and ethical approach, often clashing with older, more entrenched elements within the Bureau who prioritize security above all else. Her leadership is not just about wielding power, but about shaping the FBC's moral identity in a rapidly changing world. In recognition of the escalating threats, the FBC is actively exploring potential alliances with other entities or individuals who possess knowledge of the supernatural. This represents a significant shift from their long-standing policy of strict isolation and secrecy. They understand that the challenges posed by the dark place and other emergent phenomena are too vast for any single organization to tackle alone. This search for allies is a cautious and highly classified undertaking, involving the careful vetting of potential contacts. These might include independent parapsychologists, members of ancient secret societies, or even individuals who have had direct, personal encounters with the anomalous and survived. The FBC is particularly interested in those with unique perspectives on the dark place, perhaps individuals who have glimpsed its true nature or possess esoteric knowledge that could complement the Bureau's scientific approach. These alliances are not without risk, as the FBC must guard against infiltration and the accidental exposure of its own secrets, but the growing existential threat necessitates such calculated gambles. The dark place's attempts to manifest in the real world are becoming increasingly sophisticated and insidious. Gone are the days of simple, localized AWEs that could be contained with relative ease. The dark presence, learning and adapting, now employs more subtle, psychological tactics. It infiltrates media, subtly influencing narratives, spreading misinformation, and sowing discord. It exploits human fears and anxieties, amplifying them to create fertile ground for its manifestations. The concept of taken is evolving. While the physical corruption still occurs, the dark place is also capable of influencing individuals remotely, planting ideas, and subtly manipulating events to serve its agenda. It's a war waged not just with physical force, but with narratives, beliefs, and the very fabric of perception. The FBC finds itself fighting a shadow war, where the enemy is often unseen, its influence diffused throughout society, making traditional containment protocols increasingly difficult to apply. This necessitates a new kind of intelligence gathering, one that delves into the realm of memes, psychological warfare, and the subtle manipulation of collective consciousness. In response to these escalating and more complex threats, the FBC is developing new containment protocols and technologies. The old methods, while still effective for certain types of AWEs, are proving insufficient against the dark place's evolving tactics. This includes advanced psychometric shielding designed to protect FBC personnel from the dark presence's psychological assaults, and new forms of energy dampeners capable of disrupting the dark place's manifestations at a molecular level. They are also investing heavily in research into paratilitaryan technology, seeking to harness the unique properties of altered items and objects of power to create new tools for defense and containment. This includes developing more sophisticated hiss-dampening fields, improved methods for stabilizing thresholds, and even exploring the possibility of weaponizing certain anomalous energies. The Research and Development Division of the FBC is working tirelessly, often under extreme pressure, to innovate faster than the dark place can adapt. The stakes are higher than ever, and failure is not an option. Jessie Faden's leadership is constantly tested, not only by the external pressures of the dark place, but also by the intricate internal politics of the FBC. The Bureau, being an organization of immense power and secrecy, is inherently prone to factionalism, rivalries, and entrenched bureaucratic inertia. There are those who resent her rapid rise to power, those who question her unconventional methods, and those who simply cling to the old ways, resistant to change. The board, the mysterious entity that grants the director her authority, often communicates in cryptic, almost nonsensical directives, leaving Jessie to interpret their will and navigate the political minefield of the Bureau. She must contend with ambitious department heads, disgruntled agents, and the lingering influence of previous directors, whose legacies still cast long shadows. Her ability to inspire loyalty, make difficult decisions, and maintain the fragile unity of the FBC in the face of existential threats is a testament to her growing strength and resolve. The FBC's understanding of the source of AWs and the Dark Place is beginning to coalesce, hinting at a larger cosmic order. Through extensive research into objects of power, altered items, and the nature of the Dark Place itself, the Bureau is piecing together a more comprehensive, albeit still terrifying picture. They are beginning to theorize about a fundamental layer of reality, a primordial soup of consciousness and narrative from which all anomalous phenomena spring. This source is not necessarily malevolent, but rather a chaotic, untamed force that can be influenced and shaped by powerful entities such as the Dark Presence, or even by human belief and collective unconsciousness. The Dark Place, in this understanding, is not just a dimension, but a reflection or a distorted mirror of this deeper reality, a place where narrative literally becomes concrete. This evolving understanding challenges many of the FBC's long-held assumptions and forces them to reconsider their place in a universe far more vast and mysterious than they ever imagined. The implications are staggering, suggesting that humanity is not just a passive observer, but an active, albeit often unwitting participant in the shaping of reality itself. Alan Wake's efforts to rewrite reality from within the Dark Place continue to have unpredictable and far-reaching consequences. His struggle is not just for his own freedom, but for the very narrative of existence. Every word he writes, every revision he makes, sends ripples through the fabric of reality, subtly altering events, creating new possibilities, and sometimes inadvertently strengthening the Dark Presence. The FBC monitors these narrative shifts with growing alarm, trying to discern Wake's intentions and predict the potential fallout of his literary endeavors. They understand that his story is now intimately intertwined with their own, and that the ultimate fate of the world may hinge on the outcome of his desperate creative battle. His writings are not merely fiction, they are a living, breathing force that shapes the world, a dangerous weapon in the hands of a man fighting for his soul in a dimension where thoughts become things. The Bureau knows that Wake is their greatest asset and their greatest liability, a wild card whose actions could either save humanity or plunge it into eternal darkness. In light of all these developments, the escalating sophistication of the Dark Place, the growing number of thresholds, and the deepening understanding of the cosmic order, the FBC is preparing for a potential large-scale confrontation with the Dark Place. This isn't just about containment anymore, it's about survival. They recognize the growing power of the Dark Presence and its undeniable intent to fully manifest in their reality. This preparation involves a massive reallocation of resources, the accelerated development of new technologies, and intensive training for all FBC personnel. Strategic command centers are being established, contingency plans for global AWEs are being drafted, and the Bureau is actively seeking to understand the Dark Place's ultimate goals and weaknesses. The oldest house, with its inherent defenses and its connection to the board, is being fortified as a central stronghold. The FBC, once a secretive organization dedicated to containing isolated anomalies, is now evolving into a frontline defense against an existential threat to all of reality. The future is uncertain, but one thing is clear: the war for reality has just begun. From the unsettling whispers of Cauldron Lake to the echoing halls of the oldest house, the intertwined destinies of Alan Wake and Jesse Faden have unfolded across decades, each event a ripple in the fabric of reality, forever altered by the insidious influence of the Dark Presence and the enigmatic forces of the Altered World events. Their struggles, though seemingly disparate, are but two facets of a grander conflict, a battle for narrative control and existential truth that continues to reshape the very foundations of their worlds. And that is the complete Alan Wake and Control timeline.